Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku was the spectacular Spider-Man. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Night had fallen over the city of Musutafu, Japan, a large metropolis roughly the size of New York City. A city filled to the brim with pro-heroes, due in part to being the home of the top-ranked hero school, UA High School. Because of this, the city had earned the nickname the capital city of heroes, serving as a shining light throughout Japan. But as the old saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. Despite the surplus of heroes constantly tackling villains who were bold enough to strike during broad daylight, they were far from the only threat in Musutafu. The most sinister of threats lurked in society's shadows, often waiting for the cover of night to strike. Organized crime and its many facets run by powerful and influential people, villains who were far smarter and arguably even more evil than their daylight counterparts. And that wasn't even going into the usual street gangs, drug dealers, muggers, and petty crooks. And despite the best efforts of the Musutafu Police Department and the underground pro-heroes to combat this, there never seemed to be any significant headway against all of this evil. Not helped by the biggest majority of the limelight heroes focusing more on trying to get rich and famous to rise up through the hero ranking, or that a good chunk of the police force was getting paid by various crime lords to either look the other way or run interference. All of that without going into detail about the Hero Public Safety Commission and its shadier dealings. And sadly, with both the police and the pro-heroes, the ones who were honest and pure rarely, if ever, lasted long enough to make a difference. To the outside world, Musutafu was the capital city of heroes. But to many of the people living in Musutafu, it was a city that was covered in a massive and gloomy shadow. But even in the darkest times, a light could still shine through. The Isley district. If ever there was a part of Musutafu that could be considered a wretched hive of scum and villainy, it would be this district. It was arguably the biggest slum in Musutafu, composed of old and decaying buildings covered in graffiti, many sizable homeless camps, a couple of abandoned playgrounds, and an old elementary school building that had been condemned. There was only 2 or 3 police precincts in the area. And while the officers and staff working there did their best to make it look presentable, they still looked worn down and unimpressive. Most of the officers that did go to these precincts were either crooked, put there from better districts as punishment, total rookies who thought they could help before desperately trying to get a transfer to anywhere else, cops that just had nowhere else to go, or ones who stubbornly stayed because they didn't want to leave the few good people living in the district. Perhaps the most damning sign of all for this district was that there was not a hero agency in sight. Nor would you ever hear about any pro-heroes making a big villain takedown or saving people in this district. It was pretty much giving the impression that even the pro-heroes thought the place was beyond saving. Naturally, in a place like this, crime ran rampant. Street gangs, drug dealers, racketeers, arms smuggling, you name it, it was here. Yet despite all of this, there were still people who tried to make the best life they could for them and their families, trying desperately to keep some semblance of hope, either for salvation or for a miracle. Fortunately, a miracle was there, working in the shadows. In an abandoned warehouse on the far side of Isley, a meeting was taking place. A drug deal, to be specific. You gotta be shitting me. The man smirked, taking a drag from his cigarette before exhaling and saying, "No, my friend. This right here." He held up a small green bottle filled with a viscous liquid and the image of a gun on the label. "Is the shit." He was talking to 3 thugs, a giant of a thug with the face of a bear and the claws to match, a thug who looked normal except for the fact that his index fingers looked like gun barrels and his thumbs looked like the hammers, and a tall and lanky female thug who had a large length of metal cable coiled around each arm. Their names on the street were, in order, Grizzly, Bang Bang, and Coil. Coil raised an eyebrow and asked, "You sure this is legit?" The dealer nodded again. "Yep, Trigger, courtesy of some of my buds in the Shy Hasekai." Bang Bang was still a bit skeptical. "You sure about that? Yakuza guys like them ain't exactly what they used to be." Grizzly nodded. "Yeah, last time any Odem was that big in the business, MySpace was a thing." Coil rolled her eyes. "It's MySpace, Grizz. MySpace was a thing," he corrected himself. "Sorry, I get what you're all saying," the dealer admitted. "But they got a new boss, a new place, and a new way of operating. And this right here is their ticket back to the top of the bad guy totem pole." He then reached into his bag and pulled out 3 syringes, taking the plastic covering off the needle of one of them. "First round's free if you want to give it a whirl. After that though, for the other doses I got, well, we'll discuss prices." THWIP. Everyone looked in shock as a large strand of webbing shot down and stuck to the dealer's back, before he was immediately yanked up towards the ceiling, before more webs shot down and effectively cocooned him, like a fly in a web. "Oh no," Bang Bang groaned. "Not the bug again." Hey, the speaker lowered themselves from the ceiling, hanging upside down while suspended by a web line. The speaker was a young man wearing a black pants and a black long-sleeve shirt, with green boots and gloves that matched the sleeveless green hoodie he was wearing. He wore a green balaclava with a part of goggles with yellow lenses. Around his wrists were two large and clunky bracelet-like devices with several capsules around them, with a trigger that went into his palms. These were his titular web shooters. On the front of his hoodie was a spray-painted white spider. He looked at all of them and said, "It's Spider-Man. Seriously, is it really that hard to get the name right?" Coil glared before turning to Grizzly and Bang Bang. "Don't just stand there, you idiots. Kill him." Grizzly was the first to try and get him, rushing him and swiping at him with his claws while roaring like his namesake. Bang Bang actually hung back, putting a bunch of marbles into the holes in his palms. Spider-Man waited until Grizzly got close enough before dropping down to the floor and shooting his foot out, nailing the man with the bear quirk right between the legs, which immediately made him groan in pain and cover his manhood. Spider-Man chuckled and said, "Hey boo-boo, I just got kicked in the pick-and-nick baskets," before lifting him up and throwing him against the wall, plastering him to it with a large amount of webs. "One down, now where's?" He was immediately cut off by a buzzing sensation around his head, his trademark spider sense, which was warning him of danger coming from behind him. He immediately spun around and ducked, narrowly avoiding several marbles that had been fired at him by Bang Bang's finger guns. Looking at Bang Bang, he asked, "Sheesh, how many marbles you got left to loose?" Bang Bang grumbled, "Haha, funny. Like you haven't made the same exact joke 10 times before firing again." Naturally, Spider-Man dodged each shot, waiting until the telltale click-click that signified the man was out of ammo. Before he could reload more marbles into his handguns, the web-slinger fired several web shots to completely cover his hands and forced him to drop his marbles, not giving him a chance to recover. Spider-Man then shot out a web line and pulled himself right to him, slamming his foot right into his face. He then followed up with 3 punches, before tripping him with a leg sweep and webbing him to the floor. Standing up, he said, You'd figure you guys would have learned your lesson by now. I mean, this is like the 5th time in 6 months I've webbed up you morons." Coil sighed before the metal cables around her arms uncoiled themselves and began to glow green, the ends actually going into her wrists, implying that they were actually growing out of her. "Just my luck. If you want to squash a bug, you gotta do it yourself." Settling into a combat stance, Spider-Man replied, "Sorry lady, there ain't a sports page in the world big enough to squash this bug." She growled before flicking out one of her whips at him, which he dodged by a hair as he saw it cutting into the concrete floor where he had just been standing. He then had to jump to dodge the next whip, before twisting in midair to dodge a follow-up from the other one. As he landed, his mind was already formulating a plan. "Okay, we've done this song and dance enough times to know all the moves and all the lyrics. Each of her whips can do 3 attacks before they lose power and need to coil around her arms again to recharge. I just need to keep dancing and wait for my opening." His opening came soon as her right whip lost its green glow and began to retreat. However, before it could make it to coil, it was suddenly plastered to the floor by a large amount of webbing. "Yeah, don't think so," Spider-Man said smugly. Angered by this, Coil tried to bring her left whip around his neck, but that proved to be her undoing as it lost power halfway through and he effortlessly grabbed it. He then yanked her to him before flipping back and kicking her in the chin, knocking her into the air. A bit of webbing later and she was cocooned and suspended above the ground, both whips webbed to the ground. Giving him a look of the utmost hatred, she growled, "Damn you, Spider-Man. Damn you to FUMMMPH." Her cursing was cut off by a web shot that covered her mouth, though leaving her nose exposed so she could breathe. Now, we can't have any of that naughty language here, lady," he smugly chided. With those 3 incapacitated, he turned his attention to the drug dealer who was currently dangling from the ceiling via web line. "So, Mr. Drug Dealer," he said while picking up the bottle of trigger, "where'd you get this stuff?" The dealer's response was simply to flip him the bird. "I ain't no snitch, Bugsy. And trust me, the shy Hasekai are gonna do a lot worse than give me stitches if I squeal." Making a mental note of the name, Spider-Man would have continued talking, but then his phone beeped. He looked at what was on the screen and said, "Whoops, gotta cut this one short, guys." But first, he used his webs to zip up to the rafters, finding the backpack he stashed there earlier. He then pulled out a can of green spray paint and a folded-up stencil. Once he landed, he unfolded the stencil and laid it on the ground in the middle of the room. He then shook the can and finished, "I gotta autograph my work." About 10 minutes later, 2 cops came inside the building, guns drawn. They immediately took notice of the webbed-up villains and the drug dealer, Grizzly and Bang Bang groaning in pain while Coils just looked annoyed. The drug dealer looked down at them and asked, "You guys mind getting me down, please?" They then noticed the fresh spray paint on the ground, a large emerald green spider. The one officer said, "Looks like Spider-Man got here before us again." The second officer nodded. "Yeah, don't know what his deal is, but I'm kinda glad we got this guy helping us out here." as the officers called into dispatch to get some additional help and transport for the criminals. They were unaware of the hidden drone that had watched all of the events of the night unfold. "This is a live feed." "Yes, sir," replied a man with black hair and eyes wearing a black business suit with silver accents. "Then I've seen enough. Shade, call in the fixers. I called him in before I came in, King." "Good." The next day. Ring, ring, ring. "Wake up, sleepyhead." 15-year-old Izuku Midoriya woke up and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, somewhat annoyed by the loud ringing coming from his phone. Okay, I'm up. You can shut off the alarm, DECA. DECA was short for Digital Electronic Computer Assistant, aka the AI that Izuku created for the practical entrance exam into the UA support course. It was a very advanced AI that was capable of learning and adapting based on the information it gathered from the outside environment and what data Izuku gave it. They were, quite frankly, Izuku's only friend. Said friend, for some reason, called themselves she intended to act more like a second mother, older sister to Izuku, constantly telling him to eat more because he was too skinny and trying to make sure he got 8 hours of sleep. Frankly, he was just thankful that she didn't try to tell him to stop his nightly vigilante activities. Speaking of which, you managed to find anything on this shy Hasekai guys? He asked as he walked into the kitchen for his breakfast. There was a huff from his phone before she replied, "Of course, that would be the first thing you say. Not even a good morning." Izuku rolled his eyes and said, "Good morning, DECA. Better now." It would be better without the sarcastic tone, but yes, better. Okay, so, nothing significant on the servers or on the call lines from the local precincts. And I won't be able to get into the servers for the other precincts or the actual hero agencies until you connect our system to the Musutafu Hero Network so I can start sorting through all the data. Turning on the coffee pot, Izuku said, "I'll add it to my to-do list. Anything else I should be concerned about?" "Nothing much. Just a note from your grandma to remind you to have a good day at school and not to forget your lunch money. Your grandpa also said to not forget to video call them after school today. You know, the usual." Ever since that fateful night, Izuku had been placed under the guardianship of his grandfather and grandmother on his father's side. Since the two of them lived over in the United States and owned a big support company there, they couldn't exactly pack everything up and move back to Japan. Well, it would be moving back for his grandmother. His grandfather was born and raised in New York City, and Izuku didn't want to leave, since Musutafu was and always would be his home. So instead they paid the rent for Izuku's new apartment in the Dagaba district and wired him a weekly stipend for groceries and anything else he might need. Within reason, of course. The only stipulation was that he stay out of trouble and not flunk any of his classes. While some might assume they were distant, they really weren't. Every video call or visit they made, they never hesitated to make him feel loved and accepted, despite his status as quirkless. Of course, it helped that his grandfather was also quirkless. "Like hell I'm gonna forget that," Izuku replied as he filled his coffee cup, pouring in a dash of creamer before mixing it. One sip from his morning wake-up call and he felt last night's exhaustion wash away. Aside from that, anything on Spider-Man's latest takedown? More speculation and theories. The cops keep denying you're real, even with the marks you've been leaving. Though I can't tell whether or not that's because they don't want to admit you're doing their job better than them or because they don't want the commission coming for you and taking away their guardian angel. If what those two cops said, it's probably the latter, he replied, draining his current mug and then refilling it. You know, too much of that stuff is supposed to be bad for you, DECA admonished. Yeah, and supposedly so's everything else that's sugary, sweet, fattening, or high in caffeine, Izuku deadpan. If it hasn't killed me and 3/4 of the planet's population, I think I'll be safe. DECA said nothing, but then beeped and said you might want to hurry up and get ready if you want to make your train. Unless you're planning on swinging to school. Izuku shook his head, putting his mug in the dishwasher and making his way to the bathroom to brush his teeth. You know as well as I do that if people see me swinging through the other parts of the city in broad daylight, I'll have that district's cops and the local pros on my ass. Right, I forgot that's why you stuck in Isley for 6 months. That and our limited equipment. I could probably handle Death Arms, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady no problem, but if Endeavor happens to be around, well, my current costume ain't exactly fireproof. Not to mention your current Mark I web shooter's capacity kinda sucks, DECA reminded him. Once he finished brushing, he walked to his room and replied, yeah. First thing I'm gonna work on. As he fished his school uniform out of his costume and started changing into it, DECA asked, aren't you kinda stealing from UA if you do what you're planning on doing? Izuku paused for a moment as he put on his blazer, before continuing and replying, normally I'd agree with you, DECA. Stealing is wrong, after all. But we don't have a lot of options if I want to keep going as Spider-Man, since not only do we not have a big budget for this, but we also can only do so much from raiding junkyards for parts, unless we break into one of those really secure private junkyards used by support companies. But with our limited equipment, that's outside of our current capabilities. Yeah, true. And B, it's not like I'm stealing money or something super valuable. I've got the biggest majority of the components for the HUD and the Mark II web shooters, but I need better materials for the main suit, preferably something fireproof and more resistant to bullets than the bargain sweatshirt and sweatpants I got, but still flexible and allowing freedom of movement. Also, I've got more than enough chemicals to make a good supply of web fluid. True, took a few trips to several different stores, but hey, all of which probably isn't going to be noticed since UAS budget is huge. I could probably sneak everything I'd need and more out of there and they'd never notice. And last but not least, see, it's only temporary. Once we get better equipment and some good Spidey tools. I still can't believe you're calling them that. I can start getting components and parts from the aforementioned support company junkyards. And I hopefully won't need to borrow from UA anymore, he finished, accentuating the point by finishing tying his tie. Plus, given how the state of Musutafu is, you can't argue that it's not going to a good cause. I won't argue with the data, but still, I worry about you. Izuku smiled. Hey, I can handle it. Plus, I got you constantly reminding me to take breaks and get something to eat, and helping me out with getting information for my little night job. Speaking of which, yeah, I got it, DECA said. I'll keep looking through the police files to see if there's anything on those Yakuza guys, or anything else Spider-Man should look into. No promises though. And if there's nothing, then tonight I'll see about getting you linked to a few of the Musutafu Hero Network towers. Try and be discreet about it. Like you said. Picking up his backpack, he said, I know, but Endeavor's usually in the high-class areas of Musutafu unless he's working a case. I shouldn't have to worry too much about that. He was just about to reach the door when he found himself stopping to look at the picture. It was a picture of when he was 13, when he had won first place in the Musutafu Future Engineers Science Fair with a portable forensic scanner with a bit of help from his father. In the picture was his father Hisashi Midoriya, and his mother Inko Midoriya. He sighed. 6 months, and yet it still feels like only yesterday. You okay, Izuku? DECA called from his phone. Snapped out of his thoughts, Izuku replied, yeah. Just thinking. Well, think later. You got a train to catch. Yeah, he replied, exiting the apartment. Wouldn't want to be late on the first day of my new life. You're kidding me, right? Nezu, the rodent principal of UA and one of the smartest, sighed before replying, unfortunately, I'm not. The person he was talking to was a young woman in her early 20s with pink and indigo hair and purple eyes, which were currently narrowed at Nezu in a look that was equal parts skepticism and annoyance. This was Kaine Tsutsumi, Aka the sniper heroine, Lady Nagant. She also happened to be Class 1A's current homeroom teacher, owing to the absolute disaster that happened at the start of last year. An incident that had forced Nezu to seriously reevaluate his screening system for his staff, as well as taking measures to make sure that the teachers are actually doing their jobs, all just to try and make sure a scandal like that would never happen again. So far it seemed to be working. But a part of those new measures were heavier screening for their prospective students, especially if said students were trying out for the hero course, which brought them to the present situation, with Kaine holding up 3 of the student files. You seriously want these 3 in my class? Nezu nodded. Yes, I understand that they're far from perfect. Kaine scoffed. That's putting it lightly. Let's see, she held up the first file. Minoru Maita, multiple sexual harassment claims throughout middle school. His written exam has him listing his reason for wanting to be a pro hero is because hot chicks dig pro heroes. Barely passed the practical portion of the entrance exam. And the only reason he didn't get immediately placed in general studies or barred from the school is because his parents are on the school board and were able to sweep those claims under the rug. Mostly. Believe me, I'm not happy about this either. Yet ironically, he's going to be the least troublesome out of these 3. Next up we have Bakugo Katsuki. File says he's an outstanding student with high potential and is regarded by all of his teachers with only the highest of praises, to the point you'd swear they thought this kid was the second coming of Jesus Christ. The rodent principal sighed. Don't tell me. His record is so clean that one could eat off of it? Not a single disciplinary mark. No unexcused absences, nothing. Even I skipped a day or 2 every year when I was in school for mental health days. I don't necessarily blame you for that, but I do see your point that his records were obviously tampered with, especially given his actions during the entrance exam. You mean the 10 minutes of him tearing through robots like a literal demon, letting loose like an overly aggressive lunatic while shouting threats at the other examinees to not steal his kills? Yeah, I noticed. The part that's got me the most concerned is the fact that he didn't get even a single rescue point. I agree that that's concerning. It is because it's damn near impossible. Even Endeavor, jackass that he is, got a few even if it was by accident. The only way you get no rescue points is if you actually go out of your way to not help anyone. This kid is giving me a bad feeling, Nezu. Like he's going to be an Endeavor 2.0, but with none of the good points that Enji Todoroki has, few as they may be. He's an absolutely terrible person, but he's good at his job and dedicated to it. even if it's for the wrong reasons. A recurring problem with a lot of modern-day pro heroes. True. Any chance we can put him in Vlad's class this year? I tried and he refused. He's got Nito Minama in his class, he said, and I quote, "One loud arrogant blonde is enough for me, thank you very much." She sighed and her shoulders slumped. Of course, then again considering the Monoma family's reputation, I might have lucked out. Debatable. And our third contestant kinda pinched the bridge of her nose before opening the third and final folder. Shoto Todoroki, Endeavor's fourth and final child. Mostly spotless record, save for 2 attempts to run away from home. She groaned, and given what his sisters told me, a whole bunch of issues that their father's done his best to either suppress or outright bury, flashing her an insidious grin. Nezu asked, was that you two's version of pillow talk? Her face became as red as a tomato with steam coming out of her ears, and she yelled, "That's none of your business, you damn rat. And if you don't want me to hang your pelt above my mantle, you'll never bring that up again." Nezu's grin fell to a small smirk, before he made a placating gesture with his paws and said, sorry, I couldn't resist." She growled before taking a calming breath and continuing 5 different therapists, 12 quirk counselors, and a year spent on that special medication. She looked at Nezu with concern. Shoto's got a grip on it for now, but he's mostly just been in training gyms. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to bring him into the school now. His latest therapist, Dr. Kimmy, even said so after their last session together. She straight up said that if Shoto gets put under too much stress and loses control, it could lead to an episode. And that means all the progress they've made gets flushed down the toilet. Nezu nodded. I understand. But you know as well as I do that trying to get Endeavor to see reason is like trying to get the HPSC's president to not be so scummy. There was a pause. Before she said, it just seems like I got 3 of the biggest problem children this school has this year. What exactly am I supposed to do? Well, with Mineta Minoru, it's simple. Make it clear that sexual harassment of any kind will not ever be tolerated. And if he uses up all 3 strikes, demote him to general studies. And pray that if that point ever comes up that I've dug up enough information to get his parents booted off the school board so that we won't have any problems. And the other 2, sighing, he continued with Bakugo Katsuki. The best I can say is give him the 3 strikes, and if he fails, put him in general studies. Anything beyond that, and he's expelled. As for Shoto Todoroki, tread lightly, keep an eye on how he's doing. If you ever suspect that he's going to have an episode, then pull him out of the exercise and calm him down before sending him to Hound Dog. And if need be, we'll have to explain to Endeavor that we can't keep him in the hero course on account of his mental health. Will he actually listen? Taking a sip from his tea, Nezu smiled and said, one can dream, kinda. She rolled her eyes. Some dreams can become reality, Nezu. But the dream of Enji Todoroki getting his head out of his ass and actually caring about someone other than himself. I'd say that anyone who has that dream needs to wake the hell up. Seeing the time, she said I should probably head to my homeroom and get myself ready for this. Good luck. Am I to assume that this year Wana will actually be at orientation? She shot him an amused look and asked, who do I look like? Shota Aizawa. No, you actually care about your students and don't intentionally dress like a homeless person. Izuku Midoriya couldn't help but smile as he walked up to the door of the support course studio. So far his day had been going great. He'd evaded Bakugo's notice and slipped into his class's homeroom, 1H, and had managed to get through the awkwardness of homeroom introductions. Placing first on the support course entrance exam naturally made him a target of fascination, and he was honestly surprised that no one called him a freak or a loser when he said he was quirkless. If anything, they either didn't believe him and thought he had some sort of intelligence-boosting quirk, or they thought it was no big deal. Honestly, after nearly 10 years of the hatred and quirkism he faced at the Aldera School District, he almost cried at this. Anyway, after their homeroom teacher, Higari Majima, took them to orientation, he gave them a tour of the school and the various facilities and classrooms. Each class was taught by a pro hero, but he reminded all of them that that fact wouldn't make the classes any different than ordinary school classes, earning some groans from the students. Izuku honestly didn't mind though. At the very least, they'd be a step up from Aldera's teachers who constantly tried their best to sabotage his grades until his grandparents and their lawyers put a stop to it. Majima-sensei then took them into the support studio, aka the promised land for many of them. State-of-the-art equipment as far as the eye could see, materials and tools that you couldn't find outside of support companies. It was the birthplace of many a great support engineer. After he gave them the usual rules on safety, he gave them the rest of the time before lunch to familiarize themselves with the studio. Izuku was immediately drawn towards a large machine that looked like you could fit All Might inside, with a computer terminal attached. The machine was opened, revealing a series of mechanical arms, what looked like sewing needles of various sizes and colors, and what looked like very small welding equipment. Beautiful, isn't she? The question came from a girl about his age, with pink hair styled like tubes and yellow eyes with strange pupils that looked kind of like crosshairs. She was dressed in the same school uniform, though the goggles on her head weren't part of that, nor was the purple bandana around her neck. She smiled and said that thing is a super fabricator, designed by the geniuses at SpiderIzuku. You just feed your blueprints and type in your specifications and it can create what you want from their blank molecules. It can even integrate other tech you place inside provided it's compatible. Izuku finished. Yeah, I saw one of these at their yearly expo in Musutafu Central Station. Her smile widened. Awesome, I hear those are always sick. She then held out her hand. Meihatsum, future support engineer extraordinaire. Sensing no danger from her, Izuku took her hand and shook it. Izuku Midoriya. But you already know that, since we're in the same class, remember? Yeah, but that's us as classmates. This is us as future support engineers. Oh, I can't wait until tomorrow. I have so many babies to make. Izuku's sweat dropped at that. Babies. Aren't you a little young for that? Mei rolled her eyes at that. I meant my support gear and inventions. I'm literally putting my heart and soul into them, so in a way they're like my children. I see the logic in that. But try and remember not everyone else is gonna know that. After all, making babies usually means. Her face turned red. Got it. Sorry, I've never really had other people to talk to. Mostly it's just on forums or blogs. Izuku winced, relating to that. Join the club. Nobody really wants to be seen hanging out with a quirkless loser like me. Try being the girl with no parents and being bounced around between several foster homes, she replied glumly. Geez, was this girl his long-lost twin sister? Before he could ask that question, Power Loader said, okay guys, make your way to the cafeteria for lunch. After that, head home and rest up. The real work starts tomorrow. Izuku smirked at that declaration. Yeah, by tomorrow. DECA and I should be able to figure out how to get past all the security in this place so that I can get in. I'm gonna have a lot of fun with the super fabricator. It was true. While DECA was officially in sleep mode, she was actually using his phone's scanner and Bluetooth to poke around the school's security systems and other systems. The one time he stopped for a bathroom break, she told him that there were a few close calls, but she managed to do all of this without getting detected. She did make a quick note that apparently there were a whole bunch of hidden cameras around the school that were apparently on Nezu's private network, which pretty much meant that becoming Spider-Man inside the school was not happening unless he wanted Nezu to know his secret. And while he knew from the various news reports, blogs, and forums that Nezu didn't like the HPSC in best and absolutely loathed them at worst, pretty much everyone said you couldn't trust the rat since he always had some sort of agenda. Besides, it would be easier if nobody knew he was Spider-Man. Vigilantes and their families didn't get the same protections as other pro-heroes. So if he actually did make some good friends and his secret got out, they could become targets. So yeah, better to keep this secret to himself. In an abandoned garage in the Isley district, 3 men walked in through the back door into the dark room. Once the door closed, one of them asked, "You wanted to see us, Shade?" The lights flickered on, revealing Shade holding a folder, while a laptop sat on a small table. There was no video, but the screen said active call. Shade nodded. "The fixers are here, King." "Thank you, Shade. It's good to see you 3. Nice to see you're still as punctual as ever, Tremor." The man who had talked earlier took off his hat and bowed his head, revealing his short-cut brown hair and his brown eyes. His hands were covered in metal gloves that were designed to hold back the worst effects of his quirk. His voice carried a tinge of a country accent, likely from the Mai prefecture, as he replied, "Always a pleasure to hear from you, King. Crosshairs, excellent job dealing with that journalist. I doubt your brother could have pulled off a shot like that." A bald man with what looked like a sniper scope growing out of his right eye like some sort of futuristic monocle bowed his head. His voice was as cold and clear as ice. "The mods you gave me for all Bessie certainly helped, boss. And Stone, I hear you managed to make an example out of that bleeding heart detective." The last of the 3, a large man with skin that seemed to be made out of solid rock, nodded and replied in a gravelly voice, "You know it, King." Tremor then asked, "So I assume you called the 3 of us cause you got a job for us?" "Straight to the point like always. I'll get right to it, then." Shade handed the folder to Tremor, who opened it and began reading. "So this clown's been the one plaguing your operations in the Isley district?" "I'm afraid so. When the reports first started coming in, I could hardly credit them. I mean, a dumb teenager of all things taking down my men. How ridiculous does that sound? Fortunately, we started having these guys carry around spy drones so we could see for ourselves if our boys were being sincere," Shade said, pulling out a small spherical drone with 4 legs roughly the size of a baseball. "We started finding out that they weren't trying to stiff us out of our profits. Last night was our final confirmation. The Spider-Man is real, and while at the moment he's nothing more than a little prick, you want us to squash this bug before he gets promoted to a thorn in your side." Crosshairs finished. "Correct. Find the spider and then fix him for good. All three of them replied in unison, "Got it, King." "So, how are we looking at the school's security?" DECA, Spider-Man asked, currently sitting on a rooftop overlooking the Hasu district. It was after school, and after some really good curry from Lunch Rush, Izuku's class was dismissed for the day. After a quick trip to his apartment and a video call to his grandparents that took roughly an hour, he had dropped off his school stuff and changed into his Spider-Man suit. He then went swinging out to try and connect DECA and his phone to the Hero Network towers. This way he could pick up on any crimes in progress that the heroes weren't handling, wouldn't get to in time. Plus, there were other advantages to getting into that network. But that part of the plan wasn't until a later date. So far in the couple of hours he'd been swinging, he'd managed to swing through the Dagaba district, the financial district, the Akuma's kitchen district, and link up to their HN towers, managing to form a map of Musutafu on his phone. Thanks to that and a bit of luck, he had also stopped a woman from getting mugged, found a missing kid and walked him home, and had stopped a pawn store from getting robbed. The mugging and pawn store, he sprayed his mark on the wall and pavement near the perps respectively. But with the kid, he just gave him a note that read, "Courtesy your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man." A note that he had made on his computer and printed earlier, since he wasn't about to handwrite notes so that some detective might run it through a database to try and match his handwriting. So now here he was, taking a break and checking with DECA just as the sun had gone down and night had fallen. "Well, you were right in assuming that UAS cybersecurity was pretty strong. Nezu's private network was even more so, though I'm still trying to process how many of those hidden cameras he has. They're in almost every room and hallway except the bathrooms and the locker rooms. At least he somewhat respects people's privacy," Spider-Man muttered. "That's not the only thing that's weird. I noticed that each class has their own chat rooms, but he's got backdoor access. Everything they talk about, he'll see it, even the PMs." That definitely made his eyebrows rise behind his mask. Okay, that goes beyond being a little nosy to straight-up paranoia. All of that together makes it seem like he's afraid some of the students are spies for the commission or something. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what his problem is, but I do know that we're gonna have to be really careful if we want to sneak in after school to use the super fabricator to make your new suit and any of your gear. If he or the other teachers are still in there when you go in and I mess with the cameras, they'll probably send someone to investigate. His security drones I can fool just fine, but human, animal eyes or something else. Well, like I said, he replied as he stood up and flexed his arms, noting that both of his web shooters were down to about 50% of their web fluid capacity. Hopefully it'll only be this one time, and we can start scouting support company junkyards. I definitely want to at least build the Mark II web shooters. You're right when you said the storage capacity on these things suck. Told you. Besides, it's nearing 9 o'clock, and unless you want to swing all the way back to Dagaba, you might want to get changed and catch a train. Relax, DECA, Spider-Man replied nonchalantly, web-zipping to the next rooftop and finding the next tower. The night's still young and I've still got a lot more towers to link to and more people to help. Speaking of which, DECA sighed, but his phone screen changed to show a progress bar that rapidly started filling up. In seconds it read 100% and more of the map of Musutafu was filled in. Wow, 2.3 seconds. That's a new record. Thank you, she replied, though her tone sounded more annoyed than thankful. But you're not changing the subject on me. Standing on the edge of the rooftop he sighed and said, "Look, I appreciate that you care so much about me. But I promise you The words died in his throat as he felt the telltale buzz of his spider sense, before instinctively rolling to the side and behind a chimney, feeling the air change as he avoided a bright red laser beam, getting back to his feet and settling into a combat stance. He said, "I'm gonna have to call you back," before hanging up and slipping his phone into the pouch on the inside of his shirt. He was about to peek out to see who took a shot at him when his spider sense went off again and suddenly felt the rooftop shake like there was an earthquake. He immediately jumped into the air as a large shockwave shot out and demolished it, reducing the brick and mortar chimney to rubble. Landing, he saw 3 people, all dressed in black suits with green goggles. One of them had a large rifle, the big guy had what looked like a large cattle prod, and the guy in the middle had his metal-gloved hand on the ground, indicating that he was the one who unleashed that shockwave. "Damn it, I thought they was kidding when they said you had some sort of sixth sense," he stated. "I get that a lot," Spider-Man replied, readying himself for a fight. "But hey, I'm full of surprises. And you guys are." The big guy with the cattle prod replied, "You can call us the Fixers. And you ain't the only one with surprises, punk." The sniper guy hit a button on his rifle, and while his spider sense went off, he was just a second too slow to dodge what came next, which happened to be a large disc the size of a manhole cover that he somehow missed earlier, which broke apart to unleash large red metal cables that immediately wrapped around him and started squeezing. Before he could break free of them, they crackled and delivered a massive amount of electricity into his body, and his legs gave out, making him fall onto the ground. Every single movement he made only unleashed more of the electricity into his body, forcing him to stay still. Well, this sucks. Another job well done, boys, the guy with the gloves said, as all three surrounded Spider-Man's prone form. So, before we fill out the king's request, what say we play with the bug before we squash him? Oh, shit. Another lance of pain shot through his body again as Tremor smashed his metal-gloved fist into Spider-Man's chest again, made worse by his instinctual movement to try and break free of the bonds, causing more electricity to surge through his body and elicit more cries of pain. Son of a bitch, he choked out. Tremor chuckled at this. Don't you know when to quit, bug? Glaring at him behind his mask, Spider-Man forced himself to his knees and growled out never. He had spent the last 5 minutes getting his shit wrecked by these guys. Crosshairs had blasted him several times with his rifle, the lasers not penetrating him but instead making him feel like he got hit by a sledgehammer. Tremor hadn't used his quirk, but instead just used his bare hands and feet to hurt him. Last but not least, Stone had jabbed him multiple times for seconds at a time with his cattle prod weapon, sending even more electricity coursing through his body. Honestly, if it weren't for his enhanced durability and his healing factor, he'd probably have either passed out by now or died. As it was, it looked like these guys weren't going to get bored of beating him up anytime soon. His declaration of not surrendering had actually made all three laugh. Bloody kid thinks he's some shonen anime protagonist, he said. What a joke. Yeah, you gonna bust out of those and beat us up by raising your power level while screaming? Stone asked mockingly. Not likely, Tremor said while laughing. Those things are designed specifically to hold people with super strength quirks. Even All Might would have a problem with that. They had a point. While Spider-Man could pick up cars with little problem, he knew from what he'd seen online that he wasn't near All Might's godlike strength. After all, none of his punches could change the weather. But still he had to try. He struggled against the binds, electricity coursing through his body as he saw Stone advancing on him. Ignoring that, he focused all his effort into breaking the bonds. And as he did, something strange began to happen. Among the blue sparks emanating from the red cables, smaller red sparks began to shoot out. They weren't noticeable at the moment to the other three, but Spider-Man could feel something inside of him, something warm, moving under the surface of his skin and flowing into his heart. Stone laughed as he approached. You kids today just don't understand how the world works. He focused on the feeling while still pushing against the bonds, feeling the electricity from the cables flowing into him and giving him a surge of strength. I have no idea what this is, but it had better be good, he all but begged inside his head. You think that you can take on the world, unaware of just how harsh this world really is. He could feel the electricity from the cables fading, and could hear and feel the cables stretching out to their breaking point as the red sparks began to get a lot brighter and a lot more prominent. Not seeing this, Stone jabbed the cattle prod into Spider-Man's chest, delivering a dose of electricity into Spider-Man, which is why people like us exist, to remind you punks that you. It was then that he and the other fixers finally saw the red sparks moving around Spider-Man's body, getting brighter and brighter until he looked like a walking red star. And if they could see Spider-Man's eyes, they would have seen his green eyes glowing red with this power. He reached inside of himself and pulled, and with a cry of back, the hell off, he unleashed the power from within. The result, a massive dome of red lightning shot out from his body as he threw his arms and shattered the cables. The wave of lightning washed over the roof, stunning and sending the three men backwards. Stone, being right at ground zero, was hit the hardest and was sent him flying across the roof, landing with a loud thud. Spider-Man looked at the rapidly dispersing sparks along his hands, feeling a bit drained from his new attack but much better than he had been. Well, what the hell is this, a new power? He asked aloud. A groan from Crosshairs and Tremor reminded him he was still in a fight. But as he went to web them up, he saw that his little lightning blast had also fried the components for his web shooters, rendering them inoperable. Well, that's not good. Seeing he was at a disadvantage, he decided a tactical retreat was in order, sprinting towards the edge of the roof and leaping, easily clearing the distance and landing on the other roof. Seeing this, Tremor yelled, Crosshairs, nail that varmint. Crosshair brought his rifle up, but found that his quirk, scope, was only showing a field of static. Damn it, the brat's little light show is messing with me, scope. Surprised, Tremor tried to use his own quirk, but found he couldn't use it either. That damn kid somehow jammed up our quirks. Stone. A low groan was heard from Stone's semi-conscious body, and they saw that his skin still looked like it was made out of rock. Must not work on mutant quirks, Tremor noted. Seeing that Spider-Man was already out of sight and hearing sirens, he said, all right, we'll cut our losses for tonight. But next time we'll make sure that the bug gets squashed for good. Once he was a good distance away, Spider-Man landed on a roof and ducked behind an industrial air conditioning unit to catch his breath. I think I lost them. He pulled out his phone, which was thankfully okay thanks to the phone casing he made for it. And everyone at Aldera Junior High said I was stupid for putting my phone in a case that was waterproof, fireproof, insulated, and immune to electromagnetic pulses. Almost immediately, DECA started rapid-firing questions about his well-being, but he managed to talk her down so that he could talk. Eventually, he managed to convince her that he was fine and had managed to get away from them without getting injured too much. DECA seemed to believe this, but insisted that he call it quits for the night so that he could rest and let his healing factor take care of his injury. He agreed, if only to get her off his back, before putting his phone back in his pocket. He was about to get back up, but suddenly a massive wave of exhaustion hit him and he found he could barely move. Whatever that electrical discharge was, it must have taken a lot out of me, he thought to himself. Maybe I should just rest for a few minutes before I move on. As he slumped back against the unit, he sighed and decided to focus on the aforementioned discharge of electricity. What exactly was that? Bioelectricity? Some sort of field induction? I can think of all sorts of applications for it. Though first I'm gonna have to properly insulate the Mark II web shooters in my other tech, otherwise I'll keep frying them. Speaking of which, I wonder if I could make my webbing hold the charge from this too. Wow, you really get into your own head there, don't ya? His train of thought hit an abrupt end as his head whipped around to his left to see who was talking. The speaker was a girl around his age, with brown hair that matched her eyes, with 2 long bangs framing her face. She had rather fair skin with 2 perpetual blush on her cheeks, which made her look very cute. She was wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans with brown boots, though her clothes all looked to be a year or so old, all of which showed off her lean figure. While initially he was worried she might be there to call the cops, that was quashed by the fact that his spider sense wasn't going off, which meant she was currently not a threat. Plus, not only was there a friendly twinkle in her eyes, but she was smiling, which means more than likely she was friendly. He winced when he remembered her question before he replied, "Yeah, it's an old habit. I'm trying to break it." The girl giggled. "It's fine." She walked over in front of him and crouched down, before her face morphed into one of concern. "Ouch, you look like you got in one hell of a fight." He waved his one hand, thankfully without any issues. It wasn't anything too big. The girl raised an eyebrow, before pulling out her phone and snapped a picture before showing it to him. "Your costume says otherwise." While the camera's resolution wasn't great, it was still able to show a mostly clear picture of how he looked. And frankly, he had to agree with the girl on this one. The area around his arms, legs, and chest where the binder cables got him and shocked him were either burned from the electrical discharge or torn from when he broke through them. There were several holes and patches of cloth missing from when Crosshair shot him with his laser rifle and Stone jabbed his cattle prod into him. Even his mask wasn't safe, with one of the goggle lenses missing after Tremor blasted his face with his quirk. Fortunately, the rest of the mask was intact, and it was too dark to see his green eye. Still, he smiled beneath his mask and replied, "You should see the other guy." The girl rolled her eyes, before deleting the picture on her phone. "You need an ice pack or anything?" A bit surprised by her concern, he shook his head. "Nah, I got a moderate healing factor, so this stuff'll be fixed by tomorrow." He then sat up straight, and a fresh spike of pain hit his body, though he remained firm. "Though, if you happen to have some aspirin and a bottle of water, that would be very appreciated, miss." The girl smiled and replied, "Uraraka." "Achako Uraraka. Well, nice to meet you, Miss Uraraka. I'm Spider-Man." Spider-Man blinked, before asking, "How did you?" "Why wouldn't I remember the guy who saved me?" Racking his brain, he tried to remember what she was talking about, and the answer came to him when he finally recognized her voice. "Oh, you were the girl who got cornered by those 4 guys on the edge of the Isley District." She nodded and smiled. "Yep, 5 months ago, edge of the Isley District." Spider-Man took a bite out of his sandwich as he sat on the edge of the rooftop, enjoying a quick snack before he went back out on patrol. Looking at his phone, he said, "Can't wait until I get DECA up and running. It'll probably make this a lot." The moment he heard the scream, he dropped what was left of his sandwich, pulled down his mask, and sprang into action, shooting out a web line and zipping across the rooftops towards the sound. Once he got to the right alley, what he saw made his spider blood boil. 4 large guys that he recognized as members of the Black Vipers gang were advancing on a girl, making all kinds of whistles and lewd comments. The girl in question didn't look much older than him, and they clearly looked like adults. His spider blood boiled, and before they could go any further, he struck. THWIP. 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 4 web lines, 2 from each web shooter, shot out and attached to the backs of the thugs. With a spider strength-enhanced pull, all 4 of them were yanked away from the girl and towards Spider-Man. He looked back at the girl and shouted, "Get out of here. Go." She did so, yelling a quick thank you, and Spider-Man front-flipped and twisted so that he landed facing the thugs, harassing and planning to sexually assault a minor. That's a new low, even for lowlifes like you guys. Present day. "I made sure to let those guys know that that kind of bullshit wasn't gonna be tolerated no more," Spider-Man said. She giggled as she handed him a bottle of water and an aspirin. "Yeah, I can imagine. You sounded pretty angry." "I have a long list of types of people that I want to punch in the face," he replied as he swallowed the pill and the water. "Rapists, pedophiles, and child molesters are very close to the top." Achako raised up her fist and shouted, "Preach." He laughed a little at that, and then asked what exactly were you doing in Isley anyway. Most people I know try their best to stay out of it. She was quiet for a minute before she sighed. I was looking for someone, a friend of mine. Oh, realization then dawned on him when he realized what she meant by looking for someone. Oh, yeah, he should have seen that one coming. The Isley district was a hotbed for crime. Not just petty theft or street gangs, but also some of the bigger and far viler ones, such as the various forms of human trafficking, sex trafficking, child trafficking, and ever since the onset of quirk trafficking. And sadly, considering the absence of pro-heroes in Isley and the abysmal police force, a lot of those people who went missing in the Isley district were never even reported, let alone found. Shifting around to look at her, he asked, "Who's your friend?" If she was surprised, she didn't show it. But she reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet, before opening it to show a faded photograph of her with a girl with blonde hair tied in 2 buns and cat-like yellow eyes. Her smile showed that her canines were like fangs, and while some would mistake it for predatory, Spider-Man could see that she was very happy next to Ochako. Ochako then explained her name as Himiko Toga. She was my best friend throughout middle school, and honestly my only friend. How come? Her quirk. It lets her transform into other people. Okay, that's not so bad. But she needs to drink other people's blood to do so. And there it was. And given the stigma against blood quirks, I'm guessing she was bullied for it. Oh, much worse than that. Her own parents hated her for it, called her all sorts of things I'd rather not say. All the kids at school made fun of her, said she was a monster and a villain in the making. I told her they were all full of shit. She put the photo away and continued. The worst part was that her quirk required her to drink blood as a regular part of her diet, or else she'd start breaking down, Spider-Man guessed, remembering reading a similar thing in a case about a similar quirk. She'd start becoming more predatory, more unhinged, might even snap and go off the deep end. Ochako nodded grimly at that. I did my best to help her. I let her drink blood from me whenever she felt she was about to have an episode, and then it moved to giving her small amounts every day, since she was going through puberty. I get the picture, trust me, he cut in. How'd she end up in Isley? Her parents got found out by child services, and they got arrested. She went to move in with her grandma, who was much nicer to her, but she lived in Isley. Maybe you heard of her, Komori Toga. He nodded. Yeah, runs the local butcher shop. Has a vampire bat quirk. Well, because of that she understood Toga's situation. We kept in contact since that day. But 7 months ago, she disappeared. That definitely didn't sound promising, if he was being honest. If she was being child trafficked or sex trafficked, then she would probably be halfway across Japan by now, if not out of the country. If she was being trafficked because of her quirk, then there was a chance she might still be in Musutafu, but in some underground lab of some kind while they did whatever horrible tests on her and her quirk they could think of. Assuming that she was still alive after 7 months. Still, seeing how torn up Ochako was about this, he felt a newfound determination coursing through his body. As he stood up, he held his hand out to her, which she took as he helped her up, and he said, "Look, I can't promise anything. For all we know, she could not be in Musutafu or Japan anymore." Or he didn't finish, but the look in her eyes told him he understood. "But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to find her and bring her back." Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and she wiped a few stray tears from the corners of her eyes. "Thank you so much." He waved her off. "Don't mention it," stretching his back before saying, "Well, I better get going. I got a train to catch." Ochako looked at him confused. "You're not just gonna swing there?" Spider-Man shook his head before showing her his destroyed web shooters. "Unfortunately not. My web shooters kinda got destroyed in that fight." "Huh, I figured you just made them yourself." "Nah, which is probably a blessing, considering where the webs come out of on actual spiders." Ochako cringed at that. "Good point. Well, I guess I'll see you around." Walking over to the ledge of the building, he replied, "Hopefully it'll be after I found your friend." He then backflipped off the edge, but not before flashing her the peace sign as he did. She couldn't help but smile at that. What a goofball. Though I have to wonder, how come his voice sounded kinda squeaky? The next day. "Okay, so things to do today," Izuku said, as he looked over his wrecked costume on his bed. He had managed to get home the night before without too many problems, especially since once he turned his hoodie inside out and shoved his mask in his pocket, he just looked like some poor street urchin riding a train. Taking notice of everything that was wrong with his costume, he listed first things first, new fabric for the suit that's more resistant to wear and tear. My new electrical powers, yet still give me freedom of movement and regulate my body temperature. You thinking unstable molecular fabric or nanofiber mesh weave? DECA asked. The latter, preferably. UMF has issues with electrical conduction. If I'm gonna use my what did you call it? Bioelectric venom blast. Yep, spiders have venom, and now so do you. Yeah, I need a fabric that will actually let it get out and without messing with my suit. Nanofiber will work much better for that. Plus it's more resistant to lasers, and it can incorporate my new HUD and the new web shooters. Speaking of which, the second thing I need is to finish the Mark II web shooters. If possible, get some of my new Spidey tools made. I definitely want to at least get the Impact Web made, since if I run into those fixers it might give me an edge. Still think that's a silly name, but yeah, taking notice of the throat area. He pulled out what looked like a thin collar with 2 small speakers. I'm also gonna have to get a new voice modulator. He paused and his face paled. DUCA. Yeah, was the voice modulator still functional when I was talking to that girl last night? No, based on the damage to it, I'd say it probably crapped out shortly after you gave the fixers the slip. Why? He groaned. Because I think she might have heard me talking in my real voice. Oh crud. No, it's fine. Izuku took a deep breath. She's already a fan, and I doubt she'd get a good grasp of my voice just from that conversation. Plus, there's almost 9 million people living in Musutafu. The odds of us running into her again are slim to none. You do know you probably just jinxed it, right? DECA replied, Izuku knowing that if she had a mouth she'd probably be smirking. Shut up. Anyway, new voice modulator. You might just want to make that list on your train ride, which you're gonna miss if you don't get moving. Thank you, DECA, he said while taking his trashed costume and shoving it under his bed before grabbing his backpack. Let's hope today doesn't have any more surprises. Again, you probably just jinxed it. Izuku rolled his eyes. Funny. In the meantime, look through the police reports and the security cameras in the area. See if you can get an idea of what happened to Himiko Toga. Already on it. Have a good day at school. I'll try. It was times like these that kinda wished she could punch someone in the face without getting charged for assault. Seeing the pictures for the costumes that were supposed to be for her class, and the creative changes that were made to them without clearing it up with her first, really made her ask herself if 6 months behind bars would really be that bad. Looking at her class from her podium, she pinched the bridge of her nose and said, okay, so from what I understand, our beloved principal decided to give an outside support company the designs for your first costumes. I don't know whether it was because he was trying to take a cheaper option since UAS budget got cut from last year, or if someone at said company managed to sweet-talk him. A hand was raised and she sighed. Yes, Ada. Tenya Ada asked Tsutsumi-sensei. Are you saying that our costumes are not ready? If so, then that is rather unprofessional of that company considering. Easy, Ada, she cut in, motioning him to stop. The costumes are done. But the support company Nezu decided to go with was Monoma Industries. There was a loud thud, and everyone turned to see that Momo Yaoyorozu had decided to acquaint her face with her desk. This can't possibly be good, was the muffled grumble that they heard. Not a big fan of them, Denki Kaminari asked. Don't get me wrong, when it comes to their military, defense, and energy contracts, a lot of their tech is hard to beat. Even my parents, albeit begrudgingly, will admit that they can give Yaoyorozu Corp Tech a run for its money. Unfortunately, when it comes to the safety and quality of hero support gear, unless you're in the top 10, they've been known for cutting more corners than a paper snowflake. That definitely didn't bode well for the class. How do they not get sued for that? Jiro Kyoka asked. An admittedly good legal team in the wonderful world of fine print and liability waivers. Everyone stopped talking once kinda got their attention. Thank you, Yaoyorozu. Sadly, it's not just them cutting corners on this. Apparently the design team they assigned to your costumes decided to focus more on looks and sex appeal rather than practicality. She could see the faces of all the girls in her class turn as white as a sheet, while she felt a vein in her temple throb as she saw the perverted grin on Minta's face that he didn't even bother trying to hide. Already gave him his warning yesterday. 3 strikes and you're out, grape stain. Anyway, even if that hadn't been the case, we still would have spent today's foundational heroics going over your costumes and seeing whether or not they would pass my inspection. Seeing a student raise their hand, she asked, yes, Kaminari. What happens if our costumes pass the test? The blonde-haired boy asked. Then you and everyone else who passed would run an obstacle course to make sure that your costumes don't have any problems that could hinder you in the field. Everyone who failed would be grabbing a sketchbook or notebook and start working on a much better costume. But frankly, since all of your costumes got screwed over by Monoma Industries, instead we'll be spending homeroom discussing the problems with them. And for foundational heroics, we'll be taking a trip down to the support lab so we can start working on your actual costumes. She gave them a few minutes to process that before she activated her video board and brought up some of the costume designs. Let's start with our rock bottom one, Toru Hagakure. This is the costume that Monoma Industries made for you. The picture that came up of her hero costume was a pair of gloves and a pair of boots. And no, there's no invisible costume. There's no transparent clothing. It is in fact just a pair of boots and a pair of gloves. The girls and some of the boys in the class were all shocked or angry by that revelation. But Hagakure, while they couldn't see it, based on her voice and how she was waving the sleeves of her uniform, it was clear she was absolutely livid. Are you fucking kidding me? Do those morons seriously expect me to run around in my birthday suit? What the hell am I gonna do if some guy grabs a hold of me? And when winter comes, do they seriously want me to get frostbite? What the actual sweet fuck were those idiots thinking? And no, Ada, she yelled while looking over at the glasses-wearing boy. I will not watch my language. You're not the one who got that fucking costume. Hagakure, everyone stopped talking when Kaina talked. I understand your anger. Trust me, I do. But while I will allow some swearing in the classroom, you're pushing it. Once everyone quieted down, she sighed and said, well, next up is an improvement, but it's still at the bottom of the barrel. Yaoyorozu's costume. Yaoyorozu sighed. How bad is it, sensei? Well, you know how Midnight's hero costume, while risque, still manages to avoid crossing the line for hero decency laws. Yes, well, yours doesn't cross it. Exactly, it's more like it's tap dancing on it, she finished, as she brought up the picture. The reactions were stunned silence from the whole class. As while it was better than Hagakure's in that it had actual clothing, it was also incredibly revealing, arguably more so than some swimsuits. When Kaina had shown it to the other teachers, Nimori had even said that she saw less revealing clothes on strippers. Minta looked like he wanted to say something perverted, but a face-melting glare from her convinced him to keep his mouth shut. Yaoyorozu, however, took a deep breath and calmly said, okay, I understand that my quirk requires exposed skin for my quirk to work. However, the unstable molecular fabric I requested my costume to be made out of would have allowed me to bypass that issue. And if they couldn't provide that, there are DNA fabrics that I would have gladly given some blood, hair, or skin cells to help craft, even if those hadn't been an option. Zippers and buttons are a thing. There is no conceivable reason for me to have that much exposed skin, since it would be so much easier for someone to put a knife or a bullet into something vital. Along with that, do they just expect me to put a cape or something over myself when winter comes around? And from what I'm seeing, the material is way too thin and looks easily tearable, which is the last thing I want. Also, I requested a visor with a digital heads-up display linked to a computer on my right wrist. How is a shelf with a big heavy encyclopedia better? Do they really expect me to just pull out a book and look up chemical formulas and atomic structures when I'm in combat? And frankly, that shelf is arguably the most ill-advised thing I could ever think of, since not only does it throw my balance off with that book, but if I happen to fall on it, there's a possibility it could shatter my spine and leave me paralyzed from the waist down. And that would be the best-case scenario. She took one last deep breath and finished with, in conclusion, this is not a hero costume. It's a fucking joke. The whole class felt their jaws drop at that last declaration, since they'd never believed that the elegant, prim and proper Yaoyorozu would ever swear like that. Kaina actually smirked at that. Well said, Yaoyorozu. Now then, let's continue. The rest of the period passed without too much more outrage. Most of the costumes were in the category of passable, but needed a few tweaks. The tweaks often revolved around incorporating lightweight body armor into their designs, getting rid of things she deemed as stupid or unnecessary, or actually have the students have proper eye protection. Of course, there were a few that needed a bit more work. Did they not bother to read my measurements? Ochako called out in outrage. The only way I'm squeezing into that costume would involve me taking everything off, even my underwear. The frog girl named Tsuyuasui muttered, join the club? Ribbit. There was supposed to be a set of batons I could conduct my electricity through included, Kaminari said. What the hell? And then they came to Bakugo's costume. The hell's wrong with it? The boy in question asked. Loudly. The gauntlets, she deadpanned. Did you not bother to read the rules and regulations for support gear and weapons that was in the admissions packet? Seeing his blank stare, she groaned. Of course you didn't. Yaoyorozu, could you kindly explain to Bakugo and the class the policy on firearms and heavy explosives, word for word or layman's terms? She couldn't help but smirk at that. Layman's terms. All first-year Hero Course students are forbidden from having access to firearms or heavy explosives, whether they're part of the costume or not. What? Whether or not she heard him was unknown, as she continued. Hero Course students are allowed access to that during their second year, but only after a 6-week training certification period under Snipe Sensei's tutelage. Oh, that is bull. Bakugo, Kaina warned, barely raising her voice but her glare making it clear she wasn't impressed. Rules are rules, and when it comes to that there will be no exceptions. The gloves are good to keep since they are designed to cut back on the kickback from your quirk, but the grenade bracers have to come off. Seeing him about to argue, she added, unless of course you'd like to skip your warning and 3 strikes and just go straight to general studies. Fair warning though, Nimori is a lot less tolerant of attitudes like yours. He growled and ceased, but eventually grumbled fine. That raised yet another red flag in Kaina's head. And from how some of the other students were looking at him, she wasn't alone. The design schematics he sent in said that each gauntlet was made to hold up to 10 liters of his explosive nitroglycerin sweat. That much explosive force could bring down a building, and would definitely leave someone with severe injuries or kill them. I really gotta wonder, does he not know the strength of his own quirk and what it can do to people, or does he know and just doesn't care? She decided that neither option was particularly pleasant to think about. Tremor looked at the holographic map of Musutafu that Crosshairs was projecting from his phone. I've highlighted some good spots to try and ambush the bug, he stated coldly. Plenty of high places for me and all Bessie to work. And far enough away from known hero patrols that we can deal with him without drawing too much attention. Good job, but one slight problem, Tremor replied. We got no idea where the hell he's gonna be tonight. I think I might have an idea how, Stone said, holding up something with a pair of tweezers. It was a small red and gray metal disc, roughly the size of a small pill. Crosshairs gently took it and used his quirk to get a better look at it, noticing what looked like a transmitter on it and 8 little tiny legs that were designed to hook into fabric, while a small magnet on the bottom would let it stick to metallic surfaces. The little sob planted a tracker on ya, Stone, he concluded. Must have been when he used that weird energy wave to knock us on our asses. Believe me, I haven't forgotten that, the stone giant grumbled. How the hell didn't we know about that? Based on what I heard through all the fog in my brain, the brat was just as confused as us, Tremor explained. So more than likely us beating the shit out of him must have made him go through a quirk awakening. Either way, we'll be more prepared for it this time, Crosshairs said, with a small smile as he held up the tracer. And I think we've got the perfect bait for the trap. Ochako sighed as she exited the classroom with her lunch, having just gotten through a rather boring lecture from Present Mike on proper sentence structure. Ish, you'd think pro-hero teachers would manage to make this stuff somewhat more interesting. But nope, she muttered. Tell me about it, sister. She nearly jumped out of her skin when she heard the familiar voice, and turned to see the familiar pink-skinned girl with yellow horns and yellow and black eyes, Mina Ashido. Sheesh, Ashido, you should wear a bell. Nah, I'm not a cat girl. She smiled and said, so, you wanna eat lunch with us? Sure, she replied. Cool, see you there. I gotta grab something from my locker quick. As Mina ran off towards the lockers, Ochako sighed. How the hell is she so energetic after that boring lecture? Deciding it wasn't worth worrying about, she turned around to head to the cafeteria with them. Thud. OOF. Only to collide into someone, knocking whatever he was holding to the ground in a clatter. Taking a step back, she quickly said, I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention and the person she ran into, a boy with bushy green hair and emerald green eyes, with 4 freckles on each cheek, smiled and replied, nah, it's fine. I didn't see you either. The moment he spoke, her eyes widened. That voice, is it? The boy's eyes widened too, meaning that he obviously recognized her, but he quickly smiled and said, really sorry about that. My name's Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you. He held out his hand to her, and she could immediately see the message scribbled on it in marker, cameras everywhere. We'll talk about last night later. Understanding, she nodded and shook his hand. Ochako Uraraka. Again, I'm so sorry. Let me help you pick this up. Oh, you don't have to. No, I made this mess. I'll help clean it up. Izuku seemed a bit confused by that, but then smiled and said okay then. As she helped him pick up his stuff, her eyes fell on a green notebook with a big number 9 on it that had a lock on it. She handed it to him and asked what's in here. He immediately snatched it out of her hand and said sorry. But that's a personal project of mine that I really don't want people seeing right now. The way he stressed the words personal project obviously meant that it had to do with his Spider-Man stuff. But while her curiosity was strong, his warning about the cameras helped keep it down. So instead she smiled as she helped him up and said, well, whatever it is, I hope it turns out well for you. She then saw the patch on his uniform and asked, you in the support department? He smiled bashfully and said, yeah, that's cool. I'm probably gonna be seeing you after lunch then. You're in the hero course. Yep, class 1A. His smile turned into a full-on grin. Cool, your quirk must be pretty good to get in there. She blushed at that. It's nothing special. Excuse me. The two of them turned to see Kaina standing in the hallway, holding a bento and a bottle of water. Not to break up this little friendship moment, but shouldn't you kids be in the cafeteria? Oh, sorry Tsutsumi-sensei, Ochako replied. I was just helping Midoriya here pick up his things. Wait, Tsutsumi-sensei, Izuku asked, before his eyes lit up like a kid in a candy store. You mean you're the sniper heroine, Lady Nagant? Seemingly a bit off-put by his question, she replied yes. Is that a prob? The sentence died in her throat as he pulled out a notebook and a pen from somewhere. She then smiled and took the notebook and pen. Let me guess, hero nerd. Yeah, he muttered bashfully as she scribbled a quick autograph into his notebook and handed it back to him. Ever since I was a kid, I was one of the few kids in my old school who thought you were innocent. During your realizing where his train of thought was going, he immediately stopped and bowed his head. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. She held up a hand. Kid, it's fine. I came to terms with all that shit a long time ago. The whole debacle with the old commission president and being used as their personal assassin had definitely made the national news, especially after Nezu had managed to get the footage she recorded and get it online. The legal battle took the better part of a year, but she eventually got out of Tartarus and exonerated for her past crimes. Either way, you two should get to the cafeteria and eat your lunches. The last thing you two need is to go through the other half of the day on an empty stomach, she said with a smile. Off you go. As the two walked off, Ochako couldn't help but look at Izuku strangely. The revelation of him being Spider-Man was still going through her head, but she couldn't help but notice that he didn't seem to have anything on his person that screamed spider. No extra limbs, no extra eyes, no fangs, and he wasn't particularly hairy. All in all, he looked completely ordinary. Then again, I guess it works in his favor, she mused. No one would think someone who looked so unassuming could be Spider-Man. Lunch passed by rather quickly for Izuku, since Ochako went to go eat lunch with the girls in her class while Izuku went to eat lunch with the rest of his class. Before lunch was over though, he got a text from DECA telling him that she had some intel for him to check out. Once he got to a bathroom and saw it was empty, he asked her what she had for him. She showed him security footage from outside Komori Cuts, the butcher shop that Himiko's grandmother owned and lived in. The footage was dated back for roughly 3 weeks before Himiko Toga went missing, and showed a suspicious-looking black van with tinted windows sitting across from the shop, arriving at the same time every day and leaving at the exact same time every day. Okay, that's definitely suspicious, Izuku noted. Anyone ever report this van? Nope. On the subject of the van, it's a total ghost. No plates, no registry, and seemingly no record that it even exists. Even more suspicious. That's not all. When we tapped into those Hero Network towers, I got access to a bunch of security cameras in the districts we got covered. You're not gonna believe what I found. She proceeded to show several photos and short snippets of video, each of them showing the same black van that had been outside Komori Cuts. Is there something significant about these areas it shows up in? He asked, not quite getting the point at the moment. The screen of his phone then showed him several missing persons reports as DECA explained each location this van shows up at. Within 2 to 3 weeks, someone goes missing. All of them teenagers. That definitely wasn't good. About how long has this been going on? It's hard to say. Until you get me linked to all of the HN towers in Musutafu, I won't know all the data. But from what I've got so far, it's been going on for a few years at least. He sighed. Well, between the van scoping out the area and all of this new evidence, it's pretty clear that Toga was being targeted. Clearly, how do you want me to proceed? Look through all the records of the missing teens. Look for anything they might have in common. And I do mean anything. Family members, backgrounds, where they come from, and especially their quirks. Leave no stone unturned. Affirmative, boss, DECA replied. And fair warning, I might be showing you off to Class 1A, if only to prove that I earned my way into this school instead of cheating. Why would you be worried about Bakugo's in that class, isn't he? Izuku groaned. Unfortunately, you know I still have all of that footage of him being a jackass sandwich supreme if you want to expose him, DECA suggested, almost gleefully. He pondered that for a moment. Let's put a pin in that one, DECA. Maybe Tsutsumi might be able to drill some sense into that skull of his. DECA groaned. Fine, but the moment that he puts you in the nurse's office, all of this is going on the internet. Okay, Izuku nodded at that. Deal. Hearing the bell ring, he said in the meantime, time for class. You cannot possibly be that stupid. It was a few minutes before the bell was to ring, and Kaina was in the teacher's lounge with Sekijiro-kan, Aka the Blood Hero, Vlad King, talking to the new foundational heroics teacher. Though in Kaina's opinion, teacher was severely stretching it, since Toshinori Yagi didn't even have his teaching license yet. Then again, when you're Japan's #1 pro hero, All Might, the self-proclaimed symbol of peace, the HPSC is willing to give you some leeway and make everyone else give you some leeway. Kaina was not a big fan of the idea of All Might teaching at UA. Frankly, none of the staff were on board with the idea of him joining the staff. Not only was it a slap in the face to the other teachers that he would be teaching without having to go through the grueling process of getting a degree and an actual teaching license, but that was hardly the only problem. While initially she had thought that it was simply his inexperience as a teacher, the things that All Might had just told her pretty much solidified her opinion of him. That underneath his Herculean strength and his million-yen smile he was arguably the biggest idiot in all of Japan. The now near-skeletal Toshinori Yagi sitting in front of them innocently asked, "What do you mean by that?" Kan sighed. "Yagi, your brilliant plan for the first day is to have the kids do indoor battle trials with their quirks." "Yes, I figured it would be the best way to see what these kids are capable." "Did you seriously not watch the videos we took from the quirk apprehension tests?" Kaina asked, the annoyance evident in her voice. Well, that was just going through some tests. If these kids are training to be heroes, then they need to learn how to fight. And I feel they can learn better by doing than just sitting in a classroom. Oh, for the love of God, do you think that's all the old teachers did? Kan asked exasperatedly, desperately hoping to get his point across to the blonde moron. Yagi. These are 15-16-year-olds who have never used their quirks in combat scenarios outside of the entrance exam, and certainly never on another living person. At least I severely hope not. They're not going to know the right amount of restraint and could potentially kill someone. Especially true when you remember that some of our students have really powerful quirks. Todoroki can summon a friggin' glacier from his right foot. Bakugo can make huge explosions from the sweat on his palms. Ashido's acid has all sorts of things that could go wrong. Kaminari could kill someone if he amps the current of his electricity up too much, and frankly that's not going into Class 1B. Seeing the shocked look on Yaga's face, she smirked and continued, "Shall I go on? Or do you feel stupid enough? You're assuming, of course, that they don't just bring the building on top of them." Ken added. This is why battle trials like that are usually saved for halfway through the second semester. First half of the first semester is all about quirkless sparring and quirk control, halfway through going into quirk sparring to prepare them for the sports festival and their internships. The second half of the semester is dedicated to limited battle trials in open environments and team exercises until the midterm exams. After midterms, there's the summer training camp. Then after summer break is the second semester, where we go through more outdoor battle trials and team exercises. Once the halfway point is reached, then we go to indoor battle trials. But even then, those are usually supervised by at least 3 other teachers to make sure that nothing too extreme happens. That's of course when they're not having lessons on rescue training, tactics, and stealth training, kinda added. Yagi sputtered for a few seconds, before finally sighing in defeat and asking, "What should I be doing for the first day, then?" "Well, originally it was going to be a costume critique and inspection," Kiner replied. "Those who pass my inspection would then—" "Wait, your inspection?" All Might asked, confused. "I guess you didn't get the memo. The homeroom teachers for the Hero Course students have the final say when it comes to internships, work studies, and costumes. As such, it doesn't matter if you sign off on them or not. They still have to pass our standards. Though, okay. Also, due to your lack of experience, Nezu has decided that Vlad and I will be running foundational heroics for our respective homerooms, while you are demoted to teaching assistant." "What? And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with Nezu." The bell rang and Kina said, "Speak of the devil. I'll see you in class, Yagi." Before she exited the door, she looked over her shoulder and said, "BTW, you show up in my class with that stupid and impractical cape, I will shoot you in your ass." Once she was out the door, Yagi asked, "She wouldn't really shoot me, would she?" Ken laughed. "Yagi, she hates capes like yours with a passion. I'd say just do what she says and put on a different costume quick." Once he left, Yagi sighed. What do people have against capes? Izuku sighed as he watched as Class 1 walked into the support studio behind the 2 teachers. One, of course, was Tsutsumi, who he'd met earlier, and the other, he couldn't help but feel a bit of anger as he saw All Might walk into the room. Not that his face showed it. He still remembered that day, even after a year had passed. "I'm sorry, kid, but it's impossible to become a hero. Not without a quirk. It's better to keep your dreams realistic." He couldn't help but scoff at that. Realistic. The only realistic dream for quirkless people like me is to either save up enough money to move to a country where quirk protection laws are actually enforced, or find a tall building with rooftop access and take the express elevator down. Moron. He was jarred out of his thoughts when Power Loader finished his brief talk on safety procedures and the rules of this studio to everyone, before saying, "Now, we have plenty of students who would be willing to help you make your costumes and your gear. Personal pick. Our top scorer on the entrance exam, Izuku Midoriya." "Thanks, sensei, for putting me on the spot like that," he mentally grumbled, realizing there was no way out of this one. So instead, he turned around and put his goggles up on his forehead, before giving a tentative wave. "Hello everyone." Almost immediately there was a very loud and very familiar shout of "Deku." Izuku sighed as he saw the familiar blonde-haired red-eyed standing there, glaring at him. "Oh, hey Bakugo. I'd say it's good to see you, but I try not to lie." "What the fuck are you doing here, Deku?" Smirking, Izuku tapped the patch on his shoulder and nonchalantly replied, "I go to school here." "Doh." The moment the words left his mouth, Bakugo had closed the distance between them in record time and grabbed him by the front of his uniform and brought them face to face. "I thought I told your useless ass not to even try and apply here, you quirkless freak." "First off, you said not to apply for the hero course," Izuku replied, seemingly not bothered by anything Bakugo was doing. "I'm here in the support course. Second, I must have been absent the day you were made the boss of me. Third, thanks for blurting out my quirk status for everyone to hear, you prick." Bakugo growled before raising his hand, a few pops being heard as he started charging up his quirk. "Damn DKU, sounds like you need." Before he could finish his sentence, a hand grabbed his wrist and twisted it, causing Bakugo to cry out in pain and cutting off his attempted quirk use. That hand belonging to none other than Tsutsumi, their homeroom teacher, who was currently glaring at Bakugo to the point that Izuku was surprised that his face wasn't melting. Just what the hell do you think you're doing, boy? She asked, in a cold tone that belied the true fury she felt. While in a bit of pain, Bakugo still managed to reply, reminding this quirkless freak where his place is. There was a large amount of gasps and looks of shock from Class 1A and 1H, and though Power Loader's face was covered, even he clearly was shocked. Kaina, however, simply deepened her glare and said, "Principal's office." Disbelief flashed across his face. "What? You heard me. I don't know what kind of bullshit your old school let you get away with, but UA has a strict no-bullying policy, regardless of what your victim's quirk status is. So, get your ass down to the principal's office now." Bakugo growled, but he could see that she was serious, so he simply pushed Izuku into his work table and grumbled fine. As he walked out of the studio, Kaina then looked at All Might and asked, "Think you can handle escorting him to the principal's office?" All Might nodded. His own face formed into a scowl at what had happened. "Absolutely. Then go." Once he had left, Ochako walked forward to check on Izuku and asked, "Are you okay?" Izuku seemed to be honestly shocked by that question, but nodded and replied, "Yeah. I honestly kind of expected him to act like that. He's done that before." A red-eyed and red-haired boy from Class 1 asked in disbelief. He scoffed at that. "You could say that." Kaina sighed. "Of course he did." She then looked at Izuku and said, "I meant what I said about the no-bullying policy. He ever does something like that again, one of the teachers will be the first to know," he promised. He then looked at Class 1 and said, "BTW. Contrary to what he seems to believe, my name is Izuku Midori, not Deku." Seeing them all nod in understanding, Power Loader decided to get the class back on track and said, "Now, how about you kids talk to some of my students and see about getting your costumes made?" Kaina nodded. "I should probably go with the big guy to make sure Nezu gets the full story. Can you handle this, Majima?" "I got this." "Good. Don't destroy the lab, kids," she said as she walked out. Once she was gone, Izuku looked at Class 1 and asked, "So, who's up first for costumes?" Kaina sighed once she was finished explaining to Nezu what had happened in the support studio, all while All Might of his input at times. Bakugo, on the other hand, he simply sat there with a mildly annoyed expression on his face, seemingly not caring about the potential consequences he could face. Nezu, for his part, listened intently and didn't say a word until they were finished. Once they were done, he said, "Well, I dare say this is a new record. A student given detention on the first official day of school." Bakugo looked at him like he'd just grown a second head. "Detention? What the fuck for?" The glare Nezu gave him a look that shut him up real quick, along with a suffocating aura of malice as he spoke with an even yet biting tone. "First of all, young Bakuga, while other teachers may be more lenient on the subject, I find profanity to be overused and unnecessary. Do not use any whilst you are in my presence. Second, I am the principal of this school. You will not raise your voice at me, nor will you speak out of turn or question me unless I allow you to do so. Along with that, you are to address me as Principal Nezu or Sir. Are we clear?" He grit his teeth but eventually muttered, "Fine. Fine, Principal Nezu. Better. And as for why you're getting detention, let's see, you threatened violence against a fellow student, started using your quirk outside of class and without authorization with clear intent of causing young Midori a physical harm, and then there were your incredibly quirkish statements. You interrupt me and it'll be a whole week of detention, Bakugo," he exclaimed, seeing Bakugo about to open his mouth, which he promptly closed. Nezu huffed before finishing with, "Which clearly violates UAS stringent anti-bullying policies and the standards and examples we expect our students to set, especially those who are in the hero course. Frankly, getting your warning and a detention, in my eyes, is being far too lenient. But sadly, since this is your first on your record, my paws are tied." All Might seem to find that acceptable, but then asked perhaps we should inform his parents about this as well. "After all, I already took the liberty of calling them," Nezu said smugly. "They should be here by the end of the period." To his credit, Bakugo didn't yell out or start cussing. Rather, he just seethed in silent rage at what was happening, almost as if he thought the whole situation was absolute bullshit, which honestly confused them to no end. Does Bakugo seriously not care about what his parents say or think? Or has he seriously never been punished by anyone before? Kaina asked herself. Seeing the look from Nezu, it pretty much told her that they were about to find out. She mentally grumbled, "Why do I have a feeling I'm gonna need to find my other suit again?" Izuku had spent the last 20 or so minutes going over several students' costume designs, listening to their ideas and giving a few of his own. Some of them were rejected for obvious reasons, but the majority were good to go. Ochako's costume redesign was the first one he took care of, and really the only thing they changed was her visor, with him suggesting that he integrate state-of-the-art scanning tech into it. This way, when she became a rescue hero like she planned, she'd be able to check for trapped civilians and environmental hazards, and she was all too happy to let him make the change. Up next was Toru Hagakure, which he admitted her suit would be a bit more difficult but not impossible. And it went like that for a few of the other students until he came to the remaining few, handing the notebook back to the bird-headed Fumikage Takoyami. He nodded and smiled. Yeah, I can make the alterations to the cloak like you asked. The feather design shouldn't be too hard for the super fabricator to implement. Thank you, Takoyami replied. We appreciate it. The we became apparent as his sentient quirk. A shadowy bird monster named Dark Shadow appeared out of Takoyami's chest and smiled while giving him a thumbs up. Yeah, you're pretty awesome, they said happily. Izuku blushed, rubbing the back of his neck. I wouldn't go that far. I'm just trying to do the best I can with what I've been given. Both Takoyami and Dark Shadow looked at each other, seeming to have a conversation of sorts between them, before Takoyami asked just how often was Bakugo cruel to you. He couldn't help but give a mirthless laugh at that. Would you like the list in chronological, alphabetical, or by degree of severity? Either way, it's a long list. Seeing him not laugh at that, Izuku sighed. Look, I really try my best not to think about it anymore. I've already clocked in a lot of therapy visits and gotten a lot of support from my family. Plus, UA clearly enforces the no bullying policy, so if Bakugo tries to do anything to me again, he's screwed. They seem to accept that answer, but Dark Shadow motioned with his head to Takoyami to say something. So the bird-headed boy sighed and said, well, just so you know, you're not the only one who was bullied for things that were beyond your control. So, if you ever need someone to talk to, Dark Shadow and I will happily lend an ear. Izuku honestly wasn't surprised by that news. Despite how widespread mutant quirks were, many people who bore them were discriminated against because of them. Add on the stigma against darkness, shadow quirks, and how they were villainous, and both of them together would probably make Takoyami a prime target for it. Guess I shouldn't be surprised by that, he mused. People with mutant quirks rarely get it easy in life, not unless their mutations are so small-scale that they still look human or really attractive. Returning to reality, he smiled and said thanks. I appreciate it. Takoyami nodded and left, before Momo Yaoyorozu walked up as the last student of the day and handed him her notebook. This is pretty much the same as my original design. Though I did make a few alterations on Tsutsumi-sensei's advice, she said happily. Izuku looked at what she'd drawn and written down, and honestly found himself feeling impressed. The original design he had seen before lunch had been a simple one-piece bodysuit, with a utility belt that held a first aid kit and some high-calorie energy bars to help with her quirk, which transformed her fat cells into whatever object she knew the molecular structure of, but that wasn't what impressed him. Yaoyorozu hadn't just written down what kind of computer and visor she wanted, but had even sketched out the design and what materials she felt would be best for the job. She had also taken her sensei's advice to heart, integrating lightweight body armor into her costume, but how she did it was actually pretty impressive. She divided it into two colors, crimson red and black. The crimson red parts, rather than being unstable molecular fabric, would instead be made of thick and reinforced nanofiber mesh weave interwoven with Kevlar to provide better protection. The black parts were made purely out of the UMF, as it was much more flexible and would allow for the materials her quirk made to phase through. Might have to think about adding that kind of material functionality into a future suit, though without the interwoven Kevlar, since I'm pretty good at dodging bullets, and keeping it all nanofiber mesh. Since there's nothing gonna be coming out of my she's staring. Is something wrong with it? Momo asked, confused. Oh, no, it's all good, he quickly replied. I was just impressed by all of this. With brains like yours, I'm surprised you're not in the support course. To his surprise, Momo blushed. Oh, thank you. But I prefer to be out helping people, not stuck in a lab all day. No offense, none taken. You've got your ways to help people, I've got mine. Taking one last look over the notebook, he handed it back to her and said the visor and computer might take a little longer, but the rest of the costume shouldn't take too long to fabricate. Looking at the students grouped there, he gathered up all the notes he took and pulled out his phone. DECA, you ready for some data? The students looked at him confused. Before DECA replied, hit me, Izuku. Who's on the phone with you? Kirishima asked, a bit concerned. Izuku smirked, before showing the phone screen which read, allow me to introduce you all to the Digital Electronic Computer Assistant, DECA for short. She's an artificial intelligence I designed, which helped rocket me to the top of the support course entrance exam. Hello everyone, she said cheerfully. I'd shake your hands, but sadly I don't have any. Everyone's jaws dropped at this revelation. Finding her voice first, Momo asked, you created her? Izuku nodded. Yep, I started working on her ever since I decided I wanted to enter the support course. I started the initial coding at the start of my final year of junior high, spent the year programming and getting her data ready, and the entrance exam was when I finally brought her to life. What all can she do? Ochako asked. I designed her with the intent of basically becoming a personal assistant for people. She's capable of computing terabytes of complex data in nanoseconds. And depending on the data you give her, she can do just about anything. Especially if you give her internet access. She can set up your schedule, find you the best route and best train lines to get you to your appointments, find local events that you might like based on your personal preferences. Let's not forget that I also remind you when you should take a break from what you're doing and eat something or get some sleep," she snidely remarked. "I pulled an all-nighter and slept through a day of school one time," Izuku groaned. "Will you let that go? It was 3 all-nighters, and no." Sighing, Izuku looked back at the group and continued, "I'm planning on feeding her data that can help the police and heroes in the field in the future. First aid instructions, facial recognition scanners, forensic analyzers, calling for backup or emergency services." He smiled and said the possibilities for DECA are endless. Everyone was impressed, but Momo seemed especially impressed. "I'm surprised you haven't tried to copy her code and sell it as an app." She's not ready yet," he replied. "DECA as she is now is pretty much version 1. She's good, but there's still a few things I need to work on and patch before we get to that stage. I want to get her to at least version 2 or 3 before I release her into the wild." That was the official reason he would give. The unofficial reason was that honestly, DECA as she was now was not only able to do all that he just listed, but was also able to hack into other computer systems and servers with relative ease, as well as the fact that her memory banks were full of his life and Spider-Man stuff. If he copied her codes as she was now and set her loose as an app, he'd probably end up getting exposed, or one of her siblings would end up being used for terrible things, even with the safeguards in place. He'd already had a copy of her original code and was working on it to get version 2 that wouldn't have all those problems, and he could potentially release as an app to help people with their daily lives. But between his schooling and his nighttime vigilante work, it would probably be a while. Holding his phone with the camera pointing down at the notes which had been spread out over his workbench. "All right, DECA, let's show them what you can do. Please scan these and give me a rough estimate of how long it'll take me to fabricate and put all these together." The screen on his phone showed a progress bar under the word scanning, which rapidly filled up before changing to calculating. There was a loud ding before DECA stated, "Given all the data and what I know about your personal life and habits and discounting any serious setbacks, I'd estimate that your best case scenario would be you finishing these costumes in 3 weeks. Oh, just in time for the first trip to the USJ, Ochako said happily. Izuku nodded, just as the bell rang. Majima-sensei called for everyone's attention and said, "Okay, 1H, it's a free period today, which in this studio means clean up. Be sure you shut down everything that needs shutting down and lock everything up that needs locking up." 1A, I just texted your sensei. She says she's talking with the parents of Bakugo Katsuki and it's probably gonna take the whole period. So you're going to report to room 1B with Vlad King for the period. She also says try and play nice with 1B. You may end up working with them in the future. As Wana moved to leave, Ochako slipped Izuku another note before she joined her classmates at the door. Looking at it, he realized it was her cell phone number. Can't believe I actually got a girl's number. Eat that, Baku bitch. All Might had left before the Bakugos had arrived, his phone having rung and him needing to take the call in the teacher's lounge. And when they arrived, Kaina's first impressions of Katsuki's parents weren't what she expected, for the most part. She'd honestly expected that either one or both of them had the same loud and constantly angry personality as their son. What she got was a man who honestly seemed too quiet and gentle to ever raise his voice and profusely apologized for whatever it was his son had done. His wife, Bakugo's mother Mitsuki, was a bit closer to what she had expected, but at the same time not. While she did have a temper the moment they actually got to talking, she had calmed down considerably and now looked worried for her son's future. And when they mentioned the almost victim that was Izuku Midoriya, they were both concerned for the boy. Mitsuki even said that she and Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother, had been old friends and that their families used to be close, to the point that Mitsuki and Masaru considered Izuku their honorary nephew. And when they heard about what he did and the things he said, they were beyond furious, with Mitsuki asking Katsuki what the hell was wrong with him and making it very clear they didn't raise him to be like this. All in all, it was clear that while Katsuki Bakugo got his looks and some of his personality from his mother, his quirkism, sense of entitlement, and unyielding anger were from a source outside of the family and their home. As for Katsuki, he didn't say anything, really, aside from calling his mother an old hag after she slapped him. He mostly just sat and listened to everything that was said. Nezu eventually put his paws together and said, "I'm sure you can understand why it is that we were suspicious, given the massive contrast between his abnormally spotless record compared to his hyper-aggression and temperament during the entrance exam. Quite frankly, his record was suspicious enough on its own. I can confirm that he did miss a week of school following the sludge villain incident, since he ended up getting a slight case of pneumonia from the sludge getting into his lungs," Masaru stated. "But as far as we were aware, our son hadn't been causing any problems at his old schools to our knowledge. Yeah, we didn't get one complaint from the school and none of the Midoriyas ever said anything," Mitsuki added. "Honestly, we've seen these kinds of things before," Kaina replied. "Some schools will embellish or straight up fabricate records for the students that have powerful quirks, usually because they feel they might be able to mooch off of their potential success in the future. often covering things up and forcing everyone else to keep their mouths shut. Given the fact that your son tried to assault a fellow student, with his quirk no less, in plain view of me while shouting out derogatory nicknames, then it stands to reason that he's used to teachers turning the other cheek to his behavior. As for why the Midoriyas have never said anything, I can't say. Though considering Izuku Midoriya's quirk status and Bakugo's clear quirkist mindset, it wouldn't surprise me if the teachers at that school had it out for him and threatened him into silence. A potential lack of evidence would also make pressing charges difficult, Nezu added. However, it still doesn't change the fact that Katsuki is still fully responsible for his own behavior. Both Masaru and Mitsuki looked at each other and sighed. I'm not gonna argue with that, Mitsuku said, so spare me the drama and just hit me. Kinda sighed. Well, as Nezu explained to me, our hands are tied when it comes to the 3 strikes policy. Since this is Bakugo's first and only offense on his record, we can't really do anything except give him a warning. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. Kinda, Nezu said with an insidious grin that sent chills down everyone's spines. I only said that we have to give him the same warning and 3 strikes before we can consider demoting him out of the hero course. There are plenty of punishments we can give him. Seeing the fearful looks on Mitsuki and Masaru's faces, he quickly dropped his grin and said, sorry about that. I got caught up in the moment. Anyway, for starters, Bakugo will be serving after-school detention for the rest of the week. A low, barely audible growl emanated from Bakugo, though only Nezu seemed to hear it. We will also be keeping a much closer eye on your behavior, Katsuki, since you used your warning today. Any more acts like today and you will be getting strikes. And let me reiterate, 3 strikes and you'll be demoted to general studies and put on academic probation. Anything beyond that and you will be expelled. And an expulsion from UA will pretty much guarantee that all but the most desperate or naive hero schools will ever enroll you. Not that that'll happen, Mitsuki said. Katsuki's jaw dropped. What the hell do you mean? To everyone's shock, Masaru glared at him and said, Katsuki Bakugo, the behavior you've shown today is unacceptable. Not just as a hero, but as a decent human being. If anything, you should count yourself damn lucky we don't just fill out the paperwork to have you pulled out of school and sent to a rehabilitation center. His eyes widened. Why you wouldn't, would, can, and will, Katsuki, his mother replied sternly. You want to be a hero, then you better learn to start acting like one. And no, I don't mean like Endeavor. How that flaming bastard kept his license for so long with his flaming garbage personality is beyond me. Preach it, sister, Kaina said with a smile, which Mitsuki returned. Point is, even if you don't end up going to rehab, you get expelled from UA. We will bar you from ever going to a hero school. Seeing his son's face to white as a sheet, Masaru finished with, and that's not a threat, Katsuki. That's a promise. I should also mention that we can skip the 3 strikes altogether if the perpetrator in question does something that violates not only the school rules but also violates the law itself, Nezu stated. Or if, say, Katsuki refuses to show up for any of the mandatory therapy sessions with Hound Dog we're assigning him. What? Regaining his senses, Bakugo now growled and yelled, that's foo. Finish that profanity and you'll earn your first strike, Nezu said calmly, but with a hint of malice, causing Bakugo to clam up. You've clearly shown that Aldera Junior High has instilled a very unhealthy mindset within you. The only way to break that mindset is to have you talking to a professional who will hopefully get you to realize that your current mindset is not only unhealthy, but very, very wrong. So for the foreseeable future, you will be having therapy sessions with Hound Dog 3 times a week, possibly more if he or I feel it's necessary. And if you miss or refuse to go to a single one without a valid reason, he then fixed Katsuki with his greatest try me bitch, I dare you. Smiling death glare and said, with all the coldness of the winds of Antarctica, I will expel you and end your hero career before it even starts. Are we clear? To his credit, Katsuki did his best to stay firm, but they could all see the cold sweats breaking out on his face. Finally he growled, fine. Nezu smiled. Good. Then report to Hound Dog's office for your first session. After that, he'll escort you to where your detention shall be. Growling, Katsuki left Nezu's office, slamming the door behind him on the way out. Once he was gone, Mitsuki sighed before looking at her husband, the smallest trace of tears in her eyes. Where did we go wrong with our boy? Don't be too hard on yourselves, Kaina answered, doing her best to reassure them. I'd say that the staff at Aldera Junior High are responsible for putting that mindset in his head. And like Nezu said, he's responsible for his own behavior. We get that, Masaru admitted. But every day we tried to steer him on the right path while supporting his dream. We tried to teach and instill in him strong moral and ethical values. But what he did today, especially to someone we consider our nephew, that pretty much goes against everything we taught him. Well, hopefully Hound Dog will get to the bottom of that and be able to help him change his mindset, Nezu said reassuringly. Though in the meantime, I have another question for you too. Shoot, Mitsuki said. I've looked through Izuku Midoriya's files and I've found that neither his mother nor his father are listed in our contact. Can't believe we missed that. Would you happen to have their contact information? Immediately he realized he said something wrong, because Mitsuki and Masaru looked at each other uncertainly, before turning back to him and kinda. "You mean you don't know?" Confused, Nezu asked. "Know about what?" Mitsuki sighed, before replying. Inko and Hisashi Midoriya died about 6 months ago, killed during a gang shootout in the Isley district. There was heavy silence in the room, before Nezu finally found his voice. "Oh." Once school let out, Izuku asked DECA to find him where exactly Caffeine Lovers Cafe was, before asking if they were ready to go for tonight. Her reply was a resounding yes, though he'd be better off waiting until 6, since that's when the staff save for the night shift custodians would be gone. After asking her to see where the spider tracer he put on stone was while he talked with Uraraka, he walked into the cafe to see her sitting at a booth in the back with some matcha and a drink. So he quickly ordered a drink and some danishes and joined her. There was a tense moment of silence between the two of them before Izuku finally said, "So, I assume you have some question." "Just a couple hundred," she admitted. "But I guess my big one is how you're quirkless when you can do all the things you can do." Izuku nodded. "Figured you'd start off with that." He took a bite out of his Danish and replied, "Well, truthfully, I was diagnosed as quirkless at 4 years old, and I spent the last 10 years getting horrendously bullied because of it." "Yeah, kinda figured that out when Bakugo called you Deku and was about to set off his explosions on you." "Wouldn't be the first time," he grumbled. Deciding not to touch on that part, she instead asked, "What exactly does Deku mean?" "You rearranged the kanji for my name and it spells Dekanabu, a useless wooden doll. After I got diagnosed, everyone except my parents thought I was useless and never failed to tell me that every day. Then one day he called me Deku for short and it just stuck. I thought it meant something different, something along the lines of you can do it. You're thinking Dekaru. That's pretty much the exact opposite of Deku." "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm over it. Like I told Takoyami, UA doesn't allow bullies to be in their school. He tries anything like that again, he's fucked," she finished, smiling when she saw his surprised face at her swearing. "My parents own a construction company." "Ah," he replied, understanding. "So, were you misdiagnosed or something?" "I've heard of false negatives and late bloomers." "None of the above," Izuku said, pulling out his phone and pulling up a picture to show her. "This is how I got my powers." The picture was of a spider, about the size of a wolf spider, but colored emerald green with red legs and having a large yellow number 9 on its abdomen. Her one eyebrow raised skeptically. "Really? You seriously expect me to believe that you got bit by a spider and suddenly you stuck to walls and shoot webs?" "Right hand up to God, it's the truth. A little over 6 months ago, my father and I went to the yearly Yaoyorozu Corp Expo. They had an exhibit on cross-species genetics, trying to find genetic therapies and cures for people with genetic disorders or terminal illnesses. There were about 20 of these spiders on display, all of whom had been genetically modified to have quirks. I'm not kidding. One of them could turn invisible. One could spit out venom. There was even one that could regrow its legs if it lost one." "Okay," she replied, seeming to accept this. "So, how?" "I'm still not sure how, but somehow this little guy managed to escape its cage and get into my backpack. That night when I got home, I reached in to pull out my notebook and it crawled up and bit the back of my hand. I go to bed slightly feverish, then I wake up the next morning and I'm sticking to the ceiling." Ochako giggled at that. "Sorry, it's just, I've heard of sleepwalking but I've never heard of sleep crawling." Izuku chuckled at that as well. "Yeah, I guess that is a bit funny. But that wasn't the only change." He scrolled through his pictures before pulling up a picture of himself. "This is me, pre-spider bite." She looked at it, then looked at him, then looked back at the picture. "Ish, you look like you need a sandwich." "Yeah, I was kinda scrawny back then. And a bit on the short side," Izuku admitted before scrolling to the next picture. "This is me after I got bitten." Ochako looked at the picture, and her jaw dropped. In the first picture, Izuku looked to be roughly 5'0", looking pretty scrawny and with no noticeable muscle. In all honesty, he looked like a strong wind would probably knock him on his butt. The t-shirt he was wearing even looked like it was a hand-me-down, looking to be 1 or 2 sizes too big on him. But the second picture, Izuku had not only grown about a foot taller, but he was now sporting muscles that made him look like he'd spent years exercising and working out. This was emphasized by the same t-shirt from earlier now looking like it was hugging his body. She blushed a little before asking, "So, did the spider's venom have some sort of steroid in it?" "Because most spider bites don't give you abs," Izuku finished, putting away his phone. "I'm not entirely sure. The spider died between when I went to bed and when I found it the next day. Its fangs were all dried up and the rest of its body didn't have anything I could work with. But as you can guess, the changes didn't end with the sticky powers or my new muscles. My strength was off the charts. I could crush a steel pipe with my bare hands and I was able to lift up a junk car and I barely strained myself. My reflexes and reaction time left me able to dodge bullets, and then there was the spider sense, kind of a sixth sense that warns me about incoming danger. That sounds handy, Ochako stated. So, why go for the support course when you can do all this? You'd probably be at the top of the class if you went into the hero course. Izuku rolled his eyes and replied, well, for starters, knowing how my Midoriya luck goes, I'd end up in your class with Bakugo Katsuki. And while I'm sure me being there would accelerate him getting kicked out, I don't think my ears could handle his constant yelling. Burn. But the main thing is that, frankly, I don't like the HPSC's wonderful system of laws that stop heroes from trying to help the people who really need it. You ever notice how the Isley district has pretty much no heroes at all and a minuscule police presence? And because of that, the crime in the area is nearly out of control. Ochako rolled her eyes and replied, duh. Pretty much everyone's parents have told them to stay out of that district. And given what happened to Himiko, I can't blame them for saying that. Well, DECA and I are working on that. We've already got a possible lead. That statement sparked some hope in her eyes, which definitely made him feel better about this. But anyway, that's because the geniuses at the HPSC declared that place a black zone, a no-fly zone for any heroes unless they end up chasing a villain into it. Any pro hero who goes in there to try and clean the place up will be subject to a serious fine with the possibility to lose their hero license permanently. Her eyes widened at that. Really? But there's not even really any villains in there. They're just small-time crooks, drug dealers, and human traffickers. The kind of creeps that All Might could clear out. In a week, 2 tops, Izuku finished. I know, it doesn't make sense to me either. But the fact of the matter is if I joined the hero course and managed to graduate, I wouldn't be able to help save anyone in that district. And considering your bestie disappeared from there, he let the sentence hang there and continued. Part of why I wanted to be a hero when I was younger, and why I'm doing what I do now, is because I want to help people, to save lives. So if I graduate and have to put up with all of the HPSC's obstructive bureaucratic madness, you'd lose your license and probably go vigilante in. She rolled her eyes and jokingly guessed a month. A week at best, he replied with a smile on his face. And frankly, from what I've seen in the Isley district, those people arguably need help more than anyone else in Musutafu. And yet, for some reason, the HPSC doesn't want to send any heroes in to help, and instead pour their money and effort into keeping them out. Okay, that makes sense. But you said there were other reasons. Izuku sighed, honestly dreading this part of the conversation. Finally, he asked, you know how when we're young we're always being told that there'll always be a pro hero around to save the day? She nodded solemnly, possibly predicting where he was going with his story. Who'd you lose? Looking out the window, he muttered, my parents. Ochako's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. It's fine, you didn't know, Izuku replied. But yeah, 6 months ago, my parents and I were visiting some of their old friends who live in the Isley district. When we were leaving, I ran back inside quick because I forgot my notebook. Next thing I know, my spider sense is going into overdrive. And then I'm hearing gunshots. Lots of them. Everyone in the apartment, and I hit the dirt while the shooting was going on outside, just in case any of the shots came inside. She could see tears starting to appear at the corners of his eyes as he continued. When it was over, I ran outside to see if they were okay. 6 months ago. Izuku kept himself low as he made his way down the stairs, moving as quickly as he could without drawing attention to himself. Fear coursed through him, but his legs kept moving him forward towards the front door of the apartment building, all the time pleading, please let them be all right. Please let them be all right. Please let them be all right. He quietly peeked out from the doorway, scarcely daring to breathe lest whoever had done the shooting would get jumpy and try to shoot him. He didn't see anyone with a gun, only 2 vans driving away from the scene. Once they were gone, the street was deathly quiet, as if the whole world had suddenly lost all sound. When he was finally sure it was safe to go out, he stepped out, turning his head to where the car was parked, and his heart stopped beating as his lungs refused to take in any oxygen. The small car they owned had been shot to hell and back, the windshield shattered by multiple bullet holes. The front of the car looked like it had been turned into Swiss cheese. The tires were all popped, and it was leaking about 7 different fluids out of the engine. But none of that mattered to Izuku as he sprinted to the car, tearing off the passenger side door while desperately praying that his parents were alive, hoping for the miracle of all miracles. His father was unresponsive, his whole chest stained red from the blood oozing out of multiple gunshot wounds. His mother, however, was still keeping a feeble grip on life. He quickly tried to help her stay alive, ripping off his sleeves to try and stop the bleeding. All the time, yelling out for help, begging to the heavens for a hero, for anyone to help. But it never came. I literally held my mom's hand as the light left her eyes, Izuku finished, tears slowly starting to fall out of the corners of his eyes. Seeing this, Ochako handed him a napkin while she dabbed at her own eyes. I'm sorry, I can't even imagine. Well, I can. And believe me, it's one of the worst kinds of pain you could ever imagine, he sighed, before his eyes shone with determination. But that's the biggest reason why I'm doing this, because I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I have. So if the other pro heroes won't step up and do it, then I will. And yes, he said, holding up a hand to stop what Ochako was about to say. I know that Musutafu's a big city, and that I can't stop everyone from getting hurt or dying. I can't be everywhere, I get that. But the other pros, they don't even try. They're too worried about trying to be famous, about trying to win that stupid popularity contest that is the hero rankings, when they should be trying to keep people safe. They're not trying to be heroes, because they're too busy trying to be celebrities. And the few that aren't in it for fame or glory, the ones that are pro-heroes purely because they want to help people and make Musutafu a better place, they rarely if ever last long because the HPSC won't support them and instead try to sabotage them or try their best to corrupt them. But either way, the status quo is kept and no change ever happens. Ochako nodded in understanding. So you're hoping the example you set as Spider-Man will help shake up the status quo and get them to realize they need to be better, Izuku finished. Bingo. You know there's gonna be people who lambaste you and try and smear you, right? She asked. Yeah, I've got a plan for that. Though that's going to have to wait until later. For now, I've got some more important things to do. One of which is rescuing your long-lost friend. She smiled at that. Thank you. And don't worry, when it comes to our mutual friend my lips are sealed. He smiled back before shooting her a text. That's my number. If anything happens and you need help, let me know. Either I'll be there, or our mutual friend will be, depending on what's going on. Ochako giggled at that and asked, so, does that mean we're friends? That question definitely surprised Izuku, but he smirked and replied, I don't really know. Honestly, I never really had friends. Seeing the shocked look on her face, he said nobody in the Aldera school district were chomping at the bit to be friends with the quirkless kid that the teachers pretty much said had no future except for being a chalk outline on the street. He could see the fire burning in her eyes before she said, well, you're not there anymore, and you have a friend now. And if anyone from Aldera has a problem with that, I'll float their ass to the sun. Okay, I'm honored you'd want to throw hands with anyone who wants to screw with me, but please don't get yourself thrown in prison for me. They both laughed at that and said their goodbyes before leaving the cafe and going their separate ways. As Izuku headed back towards UA, he honestly felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off of his soul. She seems nice, DECA said from his phone. Yeah, honestly, it still feels kinda weird that someone actually wants to be friends with me. Stow that talk, Izu. Stop with the self-deprecating and just let yourself be happy for once. Deciding to change the subject, he asked, did you get a lock on the spider tracer? Yes and no, DECA replied. I had a lock on it, but when it started moving into the Yavin district, I lost the signal. If those fixers are still there, we won't get an exact lock until we link up to the towers there. Izuku sighed. Figures. How much you wanna bet that they probably found the tracer and are setting a trap for me somewhere? I'd give the actual odds, but your Midoriya luck would pretty much make it a sucker's bet, DECA snarked. He rolled his eyes at that. Remind me again why I gave you the ability to be snarky. Because you felt me just being your standard monotone robot voice would be too boring, so you gave me a personality. Right. Are the rest of the teachers out of the building? There was a few seconds of silence as DECA started looking through the cameras. Mostly. Looks like Tsutsumi-sensei and Principal Nezu are still in his office talking. But other than that, the only ones in there are the security guards and the custodians. After ducking into an alley and pulling his Spider-Man backpack out from behind a dumpster, he changed into a pair of black sweatpants, a black hoodie, and his spare mask and slipped on his spare web shooters. Looking over the school, he said, okay then. Time for what will hopefully be the only time I break into UA. With that, he fired 2 web lines at the edges of the roof and pulled back until they were taut. Okay, if I plan this right, this little web slingshot should send me high enough to get to the west wing, right near the air vent that leads down to the support department. The mental image of him not planning it right and slingshotting himself right into the near unbreakable windows of the building ran through his head, and he gulped. Please let me have planned this right. Deciding to stop wasting time, he hopped up and the web slingshot did its job, shooting him like a bullet of the roof and over the UA barrier, him being high enough that he didn't trigger the defenses. Counting down the seconds in his head, he aimed his web shooter down at the building, aiming for the right spot he was looking for. Once he got to 5 Mississippi, he fired the web line, which stuck to the roof. He immediately zipped himself down, managing to score a near-perfect landing that didn't hurt his knees, and he sticks the landing. He chuckled to himself. I give it a 9, DECA said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Izuku ignored her, instead making his way over the vent cover. The screws were loose enough that he didn't even really need to pull out his emergency mini screwdriver to undo them. All he really had to do was jimmy the cover a bit and the screws came loose. That didn't stop him from being careful with it, since once he was inside and sticking to the walls of the vent, he carefully and gently placed the cover back down, doing his best not to dislodge any of the screws. Once he was inside, he pulled out his phone and whispered, all right, I'm gonna need you to guide me here. Already got the instructions ready, Spidey. Head down while I get ready to loop the cameras. What would I do without you? He chuckled before crawling down the vent. Kinda sighed as she slumped in the seat in Nezu's office. Well, today was a day. Agreed, Nezu replied, sipping his tea. But now we need to discuss how we move going forward. She sighed. Let me guess, you want me to look into Aldera Junior High and see just what kind of a shitshow they're running, right? Nezu nodded. Yes, while I understand that Bakugo is purely responsible for his own actions and decisions, I can't help but feel that Aldera played a significant part in instilling that particular mindset, and if he's one of the many who were taught that mindset, I get the picture, Nezu, she said. If these bozos are teaching these kids to be quirkista-holes, then they need to be shut down. And considering there's no chance they'll just tell me outright if I walk in and ask, and me and the cops showing up with warrants will probably push them to start destroying evidence, I'm gonna need to fish out my other suit. Nezu grinned. Oh, yes, that special costume you still keep even though you say you're done with that lifestyle. She couldn't help but smile wistfully as she remembered when she said that. I knew deep down I'd never be done with that lifestyle. Besides, I look good in those purples and greens. Once DECA had the cameras looping their feeds, and having DECA do a quick scan for any additional security they might have missed, Izuku lowered himself from the ceiling on a web line and quietly landed on the floor. After he and DECA got through the security protocols on the super fabricator, they got to work, and in about 20 minutes, everything was completed and ready. Izuku smirked as he folded his new suit up and put it and the Mark II web shooters into his backpack. Once he wiped the record of what he did from the super fabricator and shut it down, he web-zipped up to the ceiling and crawled into the vent. Can't wait to show those fixers the new and improved Spider-Man, he said to himself. Tremor sighed as he looked at the spot from where he was hiding, hidden behind a large pile of construction girders. The place they had chosen to ambush Spider-Man, it was a construction site in the Coruscant district, one that had been shut down when it had been discovered that the workers had been part of a money laundering operation by a gang called the Tombstones. Once the police and heroes cleaned house, the place was left until someone eventually bought the site and cleaned it up. So for now it just stood there, gathering dust, looking up at the darkening sky. He grumbled before flipping on his radio. Check in. Stone here. Nothing here yet. Just like the last couple of hours, came the deep yet annoyed reply from the large man. We sure he's gonna show up? I'm positive, Crosshairs replied. He placed that tracker on us to try and find us. He'll be here, even if only to find his little ack. Both of them whipped around to look at the billboard where Crosshairs had been stationed, and felt their jaws dropped and eyes widen when they saw him, unconscious and webbed to the billboard. Well, more like plastered to it with the amount of thick and heavy webbing covering every part of him except for his head. Stone found his voice and asked where the foo. He was cut off by a loud thwip, and a glob of webbing hitting him on the mouth, silencing him. Language, buddy. The voice came from above them, and standing there on an I-beam was the wall-crawling vigilante, now in his new costume. A green and dark red design with black webs over the green parts, 2 white lenses over his eyes, and a dark red spider over his chest. He glared at them, the lenses narrowing to match, and he said now it's time for the fixers to get fixed. After he got out of the school and changed into his new suit, Spider-Man had spent the last couple of hours linking DECA to the rest of the Hero Network towers in Musutafu, before finally deciding to take care of the fixers. Rather than just go straight to the Spider Tracer, he instead scoped out the area around it, using the new advanced reconnaissance mode he put in his mask's lenses. This wonderful mode used next-gen scanning tech to not only see through walls but could also see body heat, toxins, chemicals, and could detect, analyze forensic evidence. As such, he was quickly able to find the 3 mercs, villains, and formulated a plan. The first thing he did was activate the new gadget he made, a modification from his Mark II web shooters, the Impact Web, which fired a condensed ball of webbing that exploded on impact, hence the name. The downside was that it pretty much ran through a whole cartridge of web fluid, so he had to be selective of when he used it. Admittedly, the Mark II web shooters had better storage capacity compared to his Mark I's, but that didn't really give him an excuse to be careless. Once he got it ready, he fired a web line and yanked Crosshair's sniper rifle out of his surprised hands. Before he could react to that, Spider-Man fired the impact web, which nailed him in the chest. The force of it and the subsequent explosion of web fluid sent him flying back against the billboard, splattering around and plastering him to it. A fist to the face then knocked him unconscious. He then dropped down in front of the other 2 fixers, which led to their current situation. Tremor recovered first, launching a double shockwave from both of his hands at the wall crawler. It never touched him, as he immediately jumped and front-flipped over it. He then shot out a web line and swung forward with his feet forward, performing a swing kick that nailed Tremor in the chest and sent him flying away. Stone then tried to leap up and grab him, but Spider-Man easily vaulted over him and kicked him away in the ribs, and immediately winced and rubbed his sore foot. Youch, I guess they don't call you Stone for nothing. Ripping the web off of his mouth, the rock man growled, no shit, Sherlock. His spider sense went off, and he jumped out of the way as another large shockwave demolished the ground where he had been standing, narrowly missing a large pile of cement mix. Seeing where Tremor was positioned, Spider-Man used his webs to yank up 2 of the bags. He then whipped around and launched them at the vibration quirk user, who on instinct sent out shockwaves to destroy them. But this had been what Spider-Man had been counting on, as the bags exploded and scattered their contents, forming an improvised smokescreen that hid him from view. Tremor growled, "You think that'll save you? A little bit of dust." He fired another shockwave at the smokescreen and blew it away, fully expecting to either hit Spider-Man or reveal him, only to see absolutely nothing, as if he'd seemingly vanished. What the? Where'd he go? Thwip, thwip. 2 web lines struck and attached to his shoulders, and he was suddenly yanked up into the air and turned around, just in time to see Spider-Man perched on one of the I-beams, who then jumped up to meet him and grabbed his head. "Sweet dreams, shithead." And that was the last thing Tremor heard before Spider-Man very forcefully slammed his head down onto the I-beam with a loud clong, and the inky black of unconsciousness took him. Spider-Man sprayed some more webs over him to cocoon him, before zipping down to where Stone was. And then there was one. Stone growled in irritation, before cracking his knuckles and pulling out a set of heavy knuckle-dusters that looked like they were made out of heavy steel instead of brass. "I'm gonna enjoy crushing you, insect." He rolled his eyes at that common misconception. Spiders are arachnids, though honestly, he was cut off as Stone roared and lunged at him, throwing a punch that he just narrowly dodged. Spider-Man retaliated by throwing a few punches into his side, but each one didn't do anything except give him sore knuckles. He dodged a few more punches before firing an impact web in an attempt to bind his arms, but to his surprise, Stone ripped right through it. Note to self, strengthen my web fluid in case I have to fight guys like this. Realizing he didn't have much options, Spider-Man put some distance between him and Stone and closed his eyes, looking inside himself to find that power he used last night, the Venom Blast. He found it, but immediately noticed that it wasn't nearly as strong. But what he could feel would hopefully be more than enough. Red sparks danced across his body before he opened his eyes and began to focus them into his right arm, converging around his fist and making it glow like a red star. Stone glared at him and got ready to charge. "You think those sparks are gonna take me down?" Getting ready to spring forward and pulling his fist back, Spider-Man replied, "Let's find out, Gravel Boy." Apparently that was enough to set him off, because the rock mutant quirk user charged at him like a rampaging rhinoceros. Spider-Man waited until he was closer before he finally sprang forward, dodging Stone's punch before delivering his glowing red fist into Stone's face. The result: the red electricity burst out in a powerful wave with the sound of heavy artillery being fired, with Stone being sent flying across the construction site and slamming into one of the I-beams with enough force to bend it. He then fell forward, not getting back up. Spider-Man landed and waited for a few seconds, before finally exhaling a sigh of relief when nobody got back up. "Well, how do you like that?" Detective Naomasa Tsukachi could hardly believe what he was seeing in front of him. About 10 minutes ago, a pair of officers had called dispatch and said that someone had left an anonymous tip that a vigilante known as Spider-Man had defeated and apprehended 3 villains at an abandoned construction site and that the police should get there and bring them in. Initially, he would have ignored it and dismissed it as a prank, if said officers hadn't told him that last night there had been 3 incidents where said vigilante had been involved. So he decided to humor them and investigate. And now he was at an abandoned construction site that looked like a war zone, staring at 3 villains who had been cocooned in webs and were hanging upside down from an I-beam. Stuck to the middle cocoon was a note, obviously homemade, that read, "Courtesy, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. P.S. Hope you enjoy my artwork." Look down. He did, and he couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at what he was looking at. Just in front of his feet was a can of emerald green spray paint, and in front of that was a large freshly painted spider. Underneath that was kanji that read, "More to come soon." On the one hand, part of Naomasa couldn't help but find the act kind of ballsy. Plus, he recognized at least 2 of these guys, being D-ranked villains that they'd been searching for to bring in, and he could definitely appreciate what this Spider-Man had done. But at the same time, he knew that what this person had done was vigilantism plain and simple, and it was bound to open a can of worms that would lead to lots and lots of headaches for him and his fellow officers. "Hope this guy's ready for what he's about to unleash," he muttered, before heading back to his car to radio for backup and transport, because the Hero Commission ain't gonna be happy about this. Unknown to Tsukachi, Spider-Man had been watching him the whole time from a nearby rooftop, both to recover from his fight but also to make sure the fixers ended up in custody and didn't try to escape. Once the transport vans had arrived and loaded them up, he said, "Well, I'd consider that my first major win." Through the earpiece in his mask, DECA replied, "I guess. You feeling okay after nailing that guy with your venom punch?" He nodded. didn't take too much out of me. Still wait, Venom Punch. He couldn't help but chuckle at that. Very funny, do you see? You're welcome. Anyway, I do need to do a bit more training with it. See just what else I can do with my new Venom Blast abilities. But for now, he stood up, before bringing up the map on his HUD that he and DECA made while he was connected her to the Hero Network towers, and he immediately saw several red triangles, which he knew were cries in progress. Seeing one that was close to him, he replied, "We got work to do." And with that, Musutafu's spectacular Spider-Man swung off into the night. And Arc 1, Rise of the Spider. Notes: care to guess which Marvel character she also is? Ladies and gentlemen and others, behold, SpiderIzuku's classic Spider-Man suit. Technically my second version. If you check out my DeviantArt profile, you'll see the original version, which I scrapped because the colors were a bit too light and the reds looked more like orange. Also, I didn't draw this myself. This was made on the Create Your Own Web Warrior fan game I found on the web. My artistic skills begin and end with stick figures. Phew, sorry it's been so long guys. Had some stuff going on, part of which involved me getting a PS5 and rediscovering my love for video games. But hey, I'm back and I'm writing again. Anyway, Izuku crafts his classic Spider-Man suit, which I made using a website, Game Online. I went with a simple green and red color scheme because those seem to be Izuku's most well-known colors. Don't worry. He'll get other costumes too, but that won't be for a while. Also, Izuku's origin story. I didn't want to do a copy-paste of having him be responsible for his father, mother die or Uncle Ben, but I felt he needed an element of tragedy to really push him to become Spider-Man, and this felt like the best route. Hopefully you all agree. And thus, Arc 1, Rise of the Spider ends. Next up we get Arc 2, Lab of Monsters. Until next time, Excelsior.